Chapter 381, Shanks's Outbreak. The decks of the Roger pirates and the Rockefeller pirates ran red with blood as the two crews clashed. Without exchanging a single word, Gol D Roger and Charles charged at each other. "Ha! Charles!" roared Roger, splitting Charles's greatsword in two with a single thunderous strike. He swept his gaze across the battlefield, noting the Rockefeller men dropping like leaves in autumn compared to his own standing crew. A satisfied grin crossed his face. "Your men are already falling, but it's too late for regrets. Press on." Charles didn't give Roger a moment's respite. He lashed out with what remained of his blade, only for Roger to block it in a flash. "Your swordsmanship, it's phenomenal," Roger admitted, eyes alight. "No wonder even Whitebeard himself praised you." "My skill needs no one's praise," Charles shot back, voice as steady as steel. Roger laughed and spun his cutlass in a wide arc, forcing Charles back. He curled his lips into a teasing smirk. "Come on, Charles, you're almost too calm. Are you looking down on me?" Charles's grip tightened on the broken hilt. Flames of determination sparked in his eyes as he prepared his secret technique. Demon Sword, Badian Slash! A dual-colored arc of red and green energy erupted from Charles's weapon, cleaving the air with a deafening roar as it bore down on Roger. The Pirate King's laughter vanished. He dropped his grin and met the deadly blade head-on. With a deliberate wave of both hands, he summoned his power to meet Charles's attack. "Watch out!" A deafening clash of vibrant energies rang out as their powers collided, shattering the ice platform beneath them in an instant. Frigid seawater spurted skyward from the newly formed cracks, sending jagged ice floes bobbing across the surface. Perched on one of those broken slabs, Red-Nosed Bucky, one of the Roger pirates' promising trainees, roared in triumph. "Well, well, you little brats, want a taste of my uncle's strength?" Opposite him, Deidara's eyes gleamed with excitement. He exchanged a look with his partner Robert, whose fingers wreathed in a thin, swirling mist of gas. Deidara offered a nod. "He's Bucky of the Rogers, right? Heard he's formidable. Let's join forces and take him down." Robert's expression was solemn as he raised one gloved hand. "Agreed." The air around him quivered, charged with his gas-based ability. Bucky's confident grin flickered for the briefest moment. 6 razor-sharp throwing knives gleamed in his hand, ready to fly at the first sign of weakness. His brow slicked with sweat. His heart thundered in his chest at the thought of enemies uniting against him. He could feel his own latent Haki stirring, a raw, irresistible force that made the fractured ice tremble. But he refused to show fear. Pressing his lips into a cold smile, he replied, "Fine, let's see how well you two work together." As he lunged forward, all 3 sets of eyes burned with determination. This battlefield of broken ice would soon bear witness to a clash none of them would ever forget. "I've got you covered," Robert shouted. In an instant, swirling gases coalesced around Charles, blotting out his vision. "Understood," Deidara replied, eyes locked on Charles's silhouette. With a blur of motion, he darted around behind him. Startled, Charles's body suddenly fragmented into shifting shards. "Huh?" Deidara's strike froze midair as she stared in disbelief. "What in the world?" Deidara's jaw dropped. "He's splitting himself apart?" Charles, recovering from his shock, realized his power had activated on instinct. Spotting Deidara's hesitation, he seized the moment and flung a razor-sharp knife. "Watch out!" Robert had been tracking every flicker of Charles's form. With a roar, the gas-tight fist he'd formed rocketed forward, shattering the knife in mid-flight. "Deidara, focus. This is a battle, not a daydream." Deidara snapped to attention. "Robert, look, he just multiplied himself." He pointed wildly at Charles. "He's a devil fruit user. Be careful." Robert shook his head, exasperated by his ally's overreaction as the fight intensified around them. Deidara froze the moment Shanks spoke, immediately taking a cautious step back and refusing to press closer to Bucky. If he hadn't just split from the fight, it would have been over in an instant. "Robert," he called urgently, "attack from range. Don't get close." Robert didn't hesitate. "On it," he replied, retreating several paces before unleashing a thick purple gas that rolled toward Bucky like a creeping tide. Bucky's vision blurred as the fumes closed in. A wave of dizziness washed over him, his skull felt leaden, and sleep threatened to pull him under. "Bucky, hold on! I'm coming!" Deidara shouted, anxiety lacing his voice. A short distance away, Shanks watched the scene with growing concern. Bucky was trapped between two foes, one clearly empowered by a devil fruit. Clenching his jaw, Shanks stepped forward, sword in hand. "If you want to save your friend, you'll have to get past me first." He drove his long blade toward the other opponent, Rockefeller Tesla, who met the strike instantly. Steel rang against steel as Tesla parried and riposted, forcing Shanks to adjust his stance. The exchange was sharper, more unpredictable than Shanks had anticipated. Between blows, Shanks demanded, "What's your name?" Tesla lifted his chin, eyes bright with ambition. "Rockefeller Tesla, my dream is to become the world's foremost scientist." Shanks allowed himself a thin smile as he eased back on his guard. "A scientist, huh? I'm Shanks. Let's see whose dream holds up in battle." "My dream is to sail freely on every ocean," Shanks declared, eyes alight with conviction. Charles stepped back, chest swelling with pride at the boy's passion. "You're amazing too, Shanks." On the polished wooden deck, 13-year-old Tesla squared off against 12-year-old Shanks. Though Shanks would not reach his full legendary strength until he was 39, even at 12, he was no pushover. Tesla, honed by Charles's relentless coaching and his own tireless effort, pressed the attack in a rapid three-strike combo, left, right, then left again. Shanks met each blow head-on, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. With a final pivot, Tesla landed a glancing blow that forced Shanks back. He wiped sweat from his brow, grinning broadly. "Good work, Tesla." Shanks chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from his eyes. "You're not bad yourself." Before Charles could reply, a sharp cry split the air. "Shanks!" The moment the name rang out, Shanks's face drained of color. He spun toward the voice. A few paces away, Bucky, the quartermaster, swayed on unsteady legs. His eyes were unfocused, haunted, and then he collapsed, sprawling across the deck with a dull thud. "Bucky!" Shanks screamed, dropping his sword and racing forward. A fierce, crackling aura burst from him, sweeping the crew back with its sheer intensity. He knelt beside the fallen man, small fists shaking as he checked for a pulse. Charles leapt over the rail at a run, Roger at his side. Rayleigh, who'd been leaning against the mast with amusement, straightened in an instant. Barrett and the rest of the red-haired pirates scrambled to surround Shanks, faces etched with worry. The midday sun bore down on the tense scene, a young captain's fury flaring out like wildfire, his friend lying motionless at his feet, and a crew ready to support him through whatever came next. "Hongtaro didn't disappoint me," Shanks exclaimed, a fierce light in his eyes. Kozuki Oden glanced over at him with a wry grin. "Chich, just a show of dominance, nothing worth getting excited about." At that moment, Caesar drew his sword in one fluid motion. A dark, oppressive aura burst forth, rippling into the sky like a storm cloud. Oden only laughed. He crossed his twin blades to block Caesar's slash and with equal speed spun out a counterstrike. "So that's the Overlord's might," Oden called out. "Looks like you four self-styled tyrants do have some teeth after all." Esdeath's cold eyes flicked to Shanks as she chuckled softly. "Ha ha!" Jabba met her amusement with a silent, confident smile. He hefted his double axes and swung them at Esdeath in a thunderous arc. But as the blades flew forward, Esdeath sensed his strength ebbing, just enough to ignite her wrath. Frost formed on her Western-style sword as she snarled and thrust it toward him. "Bucky!" she cried, voice ringing with command. In that instant, Shanks barreled into Tesla, sending him skidding back, and dashed to Bucky's side. Together, they prepared to stand against the rising storm of power before them. Chapter 382, Report from Gaia Island. Shanks barreled through the scuffle and skidded to a halt beside Bucky's limp form. "Bucky, are you all right? Bucky!" he shouted, shaking him urgently. But Bucky didn't stir. Shanks whipped his gaze around, locking eyes with Robert and Deidara. His aura flared, domineering and thunderous. Startled, Robert held up his hands. "Don't look at us. We didn't realize he was so fragile. He went down from breathing too much of that gas. It overwhelmed him. That's all." Shanks clenched his jaw, took a breath, then scooped Bucky into his arms, despite the pain the man still showed. He strode straight to the ship's doctor. "Dr. Kurokas? You've got to help him." The fighting paused the moment Kurokas looked up and saw Shanks bearing down on him. Even the Rockefeller pirates dropped their guard. "Move him to the ship," Kurokas said, urgency cutting through his usual calm. "I need to see exactly what's wrong." No one dared object. As Kurokas and his assistants carried Bucky away, the two pirate crews fell silent, cowed by Shanks's unspoken command. On the deck's fringe, Gol D Roger watched all this unfold. He turned toward Charles, whose eyes darted between the departing doctor and the halted fighters. Roger grinned and gestured to a nearby cask. "Tell me, Charles, would you care to sample the wine of the Roger pirates?" Charles hesitated for only a moment before returning the captain's smile. "I'd be honored." And with that, the tension eased, if only for a moment, on Gaia Island. Charles sheathed his sword and signaled a halt. The duel had dragged on far too long. No winner would be decided in a 10-day, 10-night slugfest. Better to call it a draw. After all, pirate battles had a habit of shifting from fierce combat to raucous revelry in an instant. "Gather round, everyone. Time for a feast," Roger shouted, clapping Charles on the shoulder. "Let's celebrate the arrival of the Rockefeller pirates." Charles offered a tired grin and nodded. "A feast it is." The battered crew, already exhausted, erupted into cheers. "Too bad we can't finish this today," one sailor bellowed, laughter rippling through the ranks. Sir Rayleigh glanced over at Barrett with a wry smile and gave a respectful bow. "I'll be ready whenever you are, old friend." Barrett laughed heartily. "And I'll treat you to Odin next time, Caesar." At the mention of Odin, Kozuki Odin threw an arm around Caesar's shoulders. "You heard him. My treat." Caesar, ever eager for training, cracked his knuckles and smiled. "All right, then. See you all in a few years for the rematch." Nearby, Jabba casually plucked Esdeath's sword from the deck and slipped it into its scabbard as though it weighed nothing. With swords stowed and disputes postponed, the pirates began preparations for the long-overdue banquet, toasting to fierce battles, future challenges, and the bonds that held them all together. Esdeath reluctantly sheathed her sword as the fighting abruptly stopped. In the next heartbeat, the former combatants were hugging one another and leaping in the air, cheering. Hey, let's have a party," someone shouted, and the celebration took off. Robert and Deidara threw their arms around each other's shoulders and bounded toward the others, grinning. Suddenly, Charles caught sight of something on the frozen battlefield and called out urgently to Trunks. Trunks' eyes sharpened instantly. "Everyone, get on the ship!" Charles yelled. "Trunks, do your thing!" The Roger pirates exchanged confused glances, but every member of the Rockefeller crew sprinted back toward the waiting vessel, especially those who had eaten devil fruits and knew it was safest to follow orders without question. Trunks glanced around at the few stragglers still sliding across the ice. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Without warning, his hands ignited in a crimson heat so intense the air around him rippled. "Whoa, this is bad!" someone shouted. Alarmed, even the Roger pirates broke into a run for the gangway. As they tumbled aboard, Trunks pressed his palms to the icy surface. In an instant, roaring waves of heat radiated outward from his body. The ice cracked and steamed, melting rapidly in concentric circles around the ship. Within moments, the frozen plain had turned to churning water, and the vessel bobbed freely against the melting edge. Charles and the others piled on board as the last shards of ice sank beneath the waves. Safe at last, they exchanged triumphant glances. The danger had passed for now, but whenever Trunks unleashed that kind of power, things were bound to get interesting again. Roger's eyes gleamed as the ice around the two ships began to crack and shift. He turned toward Charles and called out, "Kid, you want to join my pirate crew?" Charles steadied his breath. Trunks, pale and trembling, slumped against the rail. He'd poured every ounce of his energy into shattering the ice barrier their elder sister had cast. His efforts succeeded only in freeing the decks nearest their vessels. Beyond that, the sea remained locked in frost. Sensing Trunks was about to collapse, Charles dropped to one knee and braced him, preventing him from slipping overboard. "Look," Charles panted, craning his neck. "Gaia Island's just over the horizon. Why don't we land there and throw a proper celebration?" Roger's grin widened. "Sounds perfect. What do you say, boys? Gaia Island it is!" He threw his arms wide, rallying his crew. Beside him, Barrett leapt up to the helm, securing the wheel in his powerful grip. As the Roger pirate's ship surged forward, word reached the deck from a scout stationed aloft. "It's urgent. There's already a battle at Gaia Island," the lookout called down. "Roger pirates versus Rockefeller pirates." Before dawn, someone had slipped through the ice and made for the island to gather intelligence. Now the news crackled through the rigging. two fleets clashing on Gaia's frozen shores. Roger's laughter boomed above the commotion. "Well then," he said, eyes alight with excitement, "it looks like our party's arriving right on schedule." Charles tightened his hold on Trunks and met Barrett's determined gaze. This was more than a simple shore leave. It was the beginning of something explosive. With sails full and resolve steeled, the Roger pirates set their course for the fray at Gaia Island. I'm Charles, and from my vantage point on the shore of Gaia Island, I watched two pirate ships closing in on each other, their Jolly Rogers snapping in the wind. Without warning, cannon fire lit up the sky, and the naval vessels escorting them recoiled, scrambling to keep their distance. It took only a glance at the flags to recognize who was fighting. The Rockefeller pirates, back from their voyage around the world, and the Roger pirates, lately the most feared crew in these waters, their bounties higher than any other. Together, they were two of the four emperors of the New World, and their clash stunned everyone within sight. Inside a crowded tavern on Gaia Island, whispers turned into shouts as patrons exchanged breathless reports. The tavern owner, long rumored to be a world government informant, slipped behind the bar and picked up a secure line. "Navy headquarters, this is Gaia Island. I have urgent information. The Roger pirates and the Rockefeller pirates are engaged in battle just off our coast. Please respond." "Copy that," crackled the reply. Moments later, a Navy liaison burst into the Admiral's office. "Admiral, we've just received word from Gaia Island. There's a full-scale engagement between two of the New World's most legendary crews, right here in the first half of the Grand Line. The Roger pirates and the Rockefeller pirates clashed off the coast of Gaia Island. Word of the battle reached the Marine headquarters at once." Marshal Kong stared at the young intelligence officer in astonishment. "You're telling me the Rogers and the Rockefellers actually engaged each other?" The officer nodded, sweat forming at his temples. "Yes, sir. We intercepted reports this morning." Kong spread a series of charts across his desk and cross-checked them against the latest navigation logs, his face drained of color. "How did I miss that their routes would intersect here?" Commander Sora leaned over the map, frustration blazing in his eyes. "Get word to Garp immediately, and send Admirals Akainu, Aokiji, and Crane to Gaia Island without delay. If there's any chance to capture either crew, they must seize it." "Yes, sir." The officer snapped a crisp salute and hurried away. Before he could close the door, another envoy burst in, panting. "Sir, new developments from Gaia Island. The battle's over. Both pirate crews have gone ashore and are now holding a joint banquet." Sora staggered backward as if struck. "A banquet? Together? That makes no sense." He broke off, staring dumbfounded at the doorway through which the messenger had vanished. The two greatest pirate crews of the age, once locked in mortal combat, now feasting side by side. What could it all mean? The Marine Command trembled on the brink of chaos. Chapter 383, Roger's Move. A thunderous roar echoed through the corridors as Sora's voice cracked the air. Three members of the Crane Division, fresh off duty, froze and exchanged alarmed glances. "What are those pirates up to now?" one whispered. "I've got an urgent assignment. Gotta go," another declared, darting toward the exit. Vice Admiral Garp, sensing imminent chaos, swung toward the door himself, only to have a firm grip seize his wrist. "Hold it, Garp," a burly officer growled. The Marshal wouldn't be this furious without a dire reason. Commodore Crane shepherded Garp into the flagship's command chamber. There, Fleet Admiral Kong stood behind the central console, flanked by Admiral Suru and Captain Zepha of the Kapu Squadron. Kong's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Report." Admiral Suru stepped forward, her expression grave. "Sir, we've confirmed an unexpected encounter on Gaia Island. The Rockefeller pirates ran into the Roger pirates and immediately clashed." Fleet Admiral Kong's icy gaze didn't waver. "Explain." Captain Zepha unfurled a chart peppered with fleet positions and skirmish reports. Witnesses observed cannon volleys and boarding actions. Neither side anticipated the other's presence, so the battle erupted without warning. Garp snatched the chart, eyes widening as he read. With a roar, he slammed his fist down so hard the console shuddered. "Damn it! I never knew they'd crossed paths again," he paced furiously. "I've been on Roger's trail since they slipped away in the first half of the Grand Line, but this is new information." Fleet Admiral Kong watched him for a moment, then nodded sharply. Prepare every available vessel. We establish a blockade around Gaia Island within the hour. Garp snapped to attention. Aye, Admiral. He bolted for the door, barking orders as he went. As the command deck erupted into action, the Marines readied themselves for a confrontation unlike any other. The collision of two legendary pirate fleets on Gaia Island threatened to shake the Grand Line, and the world government would not let it go unchecked. Garp marched back into Navy headquarters, his bronze hair tousled and his uniform still stained from battle. He frowned as he stepped through the doors. For the first time in his long career, he'd failed to find anyone to confront. He'd missed the fight. Vice Admiral Kongo caught sight of him and rolled his eyes. Sengoku, the fleet admiral, looked up from the strategy table and folded his arms. Kongo's voice cut through the tense silence. What now? He asked sharply. We'd planned to trap the Rockefeller pirates at the New World's entrance, with Sengoku himself leading the siege. But with the Roger pirates showing up out of the blue, who knows what surprises they'll bring? Sengoku paused, leaning on the table. His eyes narrowed as he considered the new variable. Exactly, he said slowly. Roger's crew is already an unstable factor. If we don't prepare for every contingency, we'll be caught off guard. And it isn't just Roger and Charles we have to worry about. He tapped a finger on the map laid out before them. Golden Lion Shiki. He spent the last 2 years probing our warlord blockade, looking for any weakness. He's never broken through, but if he's learned anything, it's to wait for chaos. If Shiki, Roger, and Charles all descend on that pass at once, we'd be facing 3 powerful forces in perfect alignment. Admiral Tsuru, standing to Sengoku's right, exchanged a grave look with Kongo. Quietly, she spoke up. With so many moving pieces, and with headquarters orders limiting our options, I'm afraid this operation is too risky. If we go through with it and fail, the fallout would be unimaginable. The room fell into heavy silence. Sora, a young lieutenant at the edge of the map, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Everyone knew Tsuru was right. Rushing in could mean disaster. Yet to withdraw now would hand every advantage to the pirate crews they'd sworn to defeat. Sengoku finally straightened. All right, he said, voice firm. Stand down on the siege plan. Prepare a broader defensive perimeter instead. We'll monitor all 3 pirate groups, Roger, Charles, and Shiki, and strike only when the odds are truly in our favor. Kongo grunted, but nodded. Garp clenched his fists, bracing himself for what would come next. Somewhere out there, 3 of the world's most dangerous pirates were already moving into position, and it would be up to the Navy to make sure they didn't slip through the net. Chapter 8. Deadlock and Revelry. Admiral Air leaned forward over the conference table, rubbing his chin. Give me a moment to think this through, he said quietly. Beside him, Admiral Crane released a long, frustrated sigh. The Navy headquarters deliberations over how to handle the Roger pirates and their unlikely allies, the Rockefeller pirates, had reached an impasse. Both crews had become too formidable, especially the Roger pirates. Every previous attempt at arresting them had fizzled out. Even massed assaults by admirals yielded no lasting damage. Gol D Roger himself, his right-hand man Silvers Rayleigh, and the hulking commander Jabba the Cat were legends in their own right. Their strength had only swelled since they formed an alliance with Kozuki Oden, the former 2nd Division captain of Whitebeard's fleet. Adding the Rockefeller pirates into the mix only tightened the noose around the Navy's ambitions. Admiral Kongdu quietly admitted to himself that any headlong attack might backfire disastrously on the Navy rather than on the pirates. Far to the east, on the shores of a remote atoll called Gaia Island, the Roger crew was holding one of its legendary bonfire parties. Lanterns bobbed on the gentle waves while a roaring fire lit up the beach. Music, laughter, and the clatter of wooden plates drifted through the salty air. At the heart of the revelry stood Roger, purple coat open, hair tousled by the breeze, eyes bright with excitement. He raised a carved goblet high overhead. "To grand adventures," he bellowed, his cheeks flushed deep crimson. Standing opposite him was Charles, the young man recently recruited into Roger's inner circle. Roger passed the goblet to him with a wide grin. Charles took a generous swig and then let out a booming belch that echoed like thunder down the shoreline. The bold aroma of the vintage wine lingered on his breath. He laughed, eyes sparkling. "Incredible! This is the finest wine I've ever tasted." Roger threw back his head and joined in the laughter. "Of course it is. This came all the way from my home island. No barrel in the Grand Line can compare." The fire crackled, the crew cheered, and for a moment the troubles of the world, naval blockades, fractured alliances, looming battles, felt as distant as the horizon itself. Charles beamed as he raised his cup. "This wine, straight from the East China Sea!" Roger's eyes lit up at the praise. The two of them settled side by side, passing the bottle back and forth as they toasted late into the evening. All around them, the island's makeshift banquet had turned into a raucous celebration. Right at the start, Rayleigh had darted off to help the maids at the grill, chatting away as he turned skewers of meat. Jabba, ever eager to show off, had gathered a crowd of merry imps and was flexing his bulging biceps between swigs of ale. Nearby, Kozuki, Odin, and Caesar shared endless bowls of Odin, laughing over every bite. The festivities carried on until well past midnight. Finally, one by one, the guests collapsed onto the soft sand. Roger and Charles, equally exhausted, found themselves side by side and fell asleep under the stars. Morning light filtered through the palm fronds. Charles stirred and blinked at the gentle crash of waves. Everyone else was still asleep, sprawled out across the beach. He turned to his left and froze. Roger was curled up next to him, one thigh draped heavily across Charles's waist. Without thinking, Charles gave a single, decisive kick. "Ow!" Roger yelped, rubbing his backside. Who snuck up on me?" Charles stifled a laugh. He sat up, stretching one leg to steady himself. "Surprise, sleeping beauty. Thought you were comfortable lying on me all night?" Roger rubbed his thigh, then leaned back on an elbow and offered Charles a lopsided grin. "Hey, do you think I enjoyed being your human hammock?" Charles rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Guess you'll have to deal with it. Now help me find some breakfast." And with that, the two friends rose to greet the new day, already plotting their next adventure. Charles shrugged. "I don't care." Roger draped an arm over Charles's shoulders with a grin. That familiar swagger made Charles roll his eyes. "Charles," Roger said, voice playful, "what do you think of the new world?" They sat side by side on the sand, watching the dark waves roll in. Roger tapped his chin thoughtfully. "The new world, huh? It's more than just scenery. What's your real take?" Stirring glowing embers in the campfire, Charles glanced up. "I mean the politics out there. You're heading back soon. Got any plans?" Roger leaned back, the firelight dancing across his features. "Plans? Absolutely. Step 1. Drive Lingling's forces out of my territory. Step 2. Wait for the right moment and push further. Maybe even seize some of your lands." Charles arched an eyebrow. "Really ambitious." Roger's grin widened. He paused, then added, "Or, hear me out, what if I gave all my New World territory to you?" Charles stopped stirring the embers mid-motion and stared at him. "You're kidding. Why would you hand over territory you worked so hard for? Last I checked, your lands stretch from the front lines all the way to the rear." Charles stared at Roger in disbelief. "You want me to side with Whitebeard Edward Newgate, Charlotte Lingling, and Golden Lion Shiji, and then take them all on at once?" Roger shook his head and laughed softly. No, nothing so reckless. I simply don't wish to hold those territories myself. I'd rather entrust them to someone competent." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" "Because under your rule, people actually have enough to eat," Roger replied, his tone suddenly earnest. "In all my years sailing the New World, I've met Whitebeard, Golden Lion Shiji, Charlotte Lingling, and countless other powers. Yet only within your sphere of influence do the common folk prosper." He turned to gaze out at the endless ocean, his eyes reflecting memories of past voyages. "Is that why I should hand this land over to you?" Charles felt a jolt of surprise, and something resembling guilt. He'd never given his territories a second thought, content to let them grow on their own while collecting a modest protection fee to support the Rockefeller pirates. But listening to Roger, he realized how hollow that indifference had been. Perhaps it was time he took responsibility for the people who depended on him. Chapter 384. Perhaps Charles himself doesn't fully realize the extent of what he's done. After seizing those islands, he dismantled the power of the local nobility and lifted an enormous weight from the shoulders of the islanders. Gone were the exploitative feudal taxes, and the Rockefeller pirates, who once patrolled those waters, now scarcely gave the islands a second thought. Freed from oppression, the people prospered visibly, their wealth growing by the day. That very prosperity is why Commander Lingling can barely contain her eagerness to conquer Charles's domain. Nearly all of his islands are rich in natural resources, veins of ore, mines, and quarries that even the world government taps through covert agents. Charles is more than aware of it, and he's pleased. Beside him, Roger said nothing, merely taking a slow swig from his flask. After a moment, Charles met his gaze and offered, "I'll need some time to consider this." He hadn't refused outright. There was much to weigh. Roger simply shrugged. "No hurry," he replied easily. "My territory's right over there. Whenever you're ready, just plant your flag." And with that, Roger fell silent again, unconcerned and at ease. Roger had wrested those islands from Edward Newgate, better known as Whitebeard, Shiki the Golden Lion, and Charlotte Lingling, liberating them from their former rulers. Yet despite his best efforts, the territories remained impoverished and struggling. Roger realized he couldn't do them justice and still pursue his true dream, sailing the world without a single chain to hold him back. At first, he'd intended to hand the islands over to Whitebeard, but everything changed the moment he laid eyes on Charles's lands under the Rockefeller banner. There was potential there, order, resources, and willing hands to rebuild. Charles simply nodded his agreement, a quiet promise to restore the outposts Roger could no longer govern. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in pale gold. As Roger waited for his crew to stir, he filled the morning air with easy chatter. Charles sat beside him, listening with a patient smile, like a fly buzzing at Roger's ear, never quite silenced, but never unwelcome either. He'd grown accustomed to Roger's endless stories and half-joked that he might just absorb them by osmosis. When the last sailor finally hauled himself to his feet, Roger paused and let out a soft sigh. He turned to Charles, eyes bright with affection and the faintest hint of sorrow. "The best moments always slip away too fast," he said. "Now we're off on a new voyage. I wish you every success in rebuilding these islands, and a safe journey in whatever adventures come your way." Roger stood, offered one last wave, and climbed aboard his ship. Charles remained on the beach, watching the vessel's dark silhouette recede into the morning mist. He watched until it was nothing more than a memory on the horizon, and he knew, deep down, that this farewell would be their last. Charles watched the Roger pirate's ship fade into the horizon, the salt breeze carrying away their final farewells. After a day and a night spent in discovery and conversation, he still couldn't pin down his true feelings about Roger. Perhaps only time and the world would tell. "Goodbye," Roger's crew shouted in unison, their voices trailing across the water. "Goodbye," Caesar and the rest of the Rockefeller pirates called back. In a matter of moments, Roger's ship was nothing more than a white dot on the blue sea. Charles rose to his feet on the sandy shore. He squared his shoulders, looked back at his own crew, and announced, "Our voyage begins now. Are the kids ready?" "Always ready, Captain," came the cheerful reply from the cluster of youngsters gathered at his feet. "Excellent. Then let's go." Charles swept one arm toward the sea. "All hands, set sail." A dozen small figures, his little ghosts, pumped their fists in the air, while the sword-wielding veterans on deck exchanged amused smiles at the children's boundless enthusiasm. Charles climbed onto the helm and checked the log-pose's needle. He turned to Caesar, who stood nearby with his gaze fixed on the sky. "Are you ready?" Charles asked. Caesar gave a determined nod. "I'll do my very best." "Then let's get started," Charles said, voice ringing with excitement. "All crew members, prepare for liftoff." With a shout that echoed across the deck, Charles guided the Rockefeller pirate's ship away from the shore. Ahead lay the open sea, and beyond that, the legendary Sky Island. Charles had originally planned to summon Caesar's flame cloud to raise the ship, but when he spotted a powerful upwelling forming beside them, he changed his mind. Directing Caesar to steer the massive vessel, hundreds of meters long and carrying 1,000 souls, into the rising current would lift them high enough. Once the current weakened, Caesar could ease the ship onto the island safely. Any other tactic risked smashing the colossal hull against the shore. Below deck, the crew finished their preparations. On the upper deck, Charles watched the sea swell beneath them, wind tugging at his coat. When the current peaked, he gave the signal with a sharp wave. The ship's prow surged into the roaring water, hoisting them skyward. Nearby, a pirate off Gaia Island gaped in horror. "What are they doing? They'll be torn apart." "No," another replied, eyes wide. "They're going after the lost Golden City." At the pirate's words, a young man, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. He stared at the airborne ship with fierce determination. "The Golden City? You mean that tale from Rolando Lee, the great braggart?" A chorus of scoffs rose around him. "It's just an old sailor's yarn," one pirate sneered. "Rolando made it up while drinking." Unperturbed, the boy clenched his fists, jaw set. Despite the laughter and disbelief swirling about him, he believed in that legend with every fiber of his being, and he was ready to prove it true. Charles watched in awe as the Rockefeller pirate ship tore through the clouds. "One day, I'll build a ship that flies even higher," he vowed, only to be drowned out by the roar of wind and laughter around him. "Oh!" came a chorus of excited voices. Robert and the other crew members clutched the railing, faces alight with thrill. "This is incredible!" Robert shouted. Charles gripped the rail just as tightly. "Always stay alert," he reminded himself. The ship surged upward, 1,000 meters, 3,000, 6,000, 8,000. The deck pitched and rolled with each powerful blast of air. Suddenly, the forward drive sputtered and died. The ship quivered. If they didn't act fast, gravity would hurl them back into the sea, smashing hull and crew alike. Charles's heart pounded. "Caesar!" he bellowed. At his shout, a deep rumble answered from below decks. Caesar, the mighty creature whose magic fueled the ship, thrust his head through an open hatch. With a deafening roar, his sinewy form bulged and stretched. Scales flared, muscles rippled, and in moments he towered hundreds of meters tall above the deck, wings unfurled in a magnificent arc. The giant dragon hovered, magic crackling around him, ready once more to carry the Rockefeller, and Charles's dreams, ever skyward. Charles stared in awe as Caesar reared back, its cavernous jaws opening wide. A billowing cloud of flame roared out beneath the Poseidon. Caesar, the mighty fire dragon, slithered under the ship's hull, coiling his 30-meter-long form around its keel. With a thunderous bellow, he lifted the 10,000-ton steel vessel skyward. The deck shuddered under the strain. Even though Caesar's inferno had lightened the load, the ascent was agonizingly slow. Charles clenched the railing, knuckles white, as the Poseidon groaned its protest. "Keep going, Caesar," he called out over the roar of the wind. The dragon answered with another deafening roar and accelerated. At last, they burst through the island cloud ceiling, plunging into clear blue sky. The scattered isles below drifted peacefully in the sunlight. "Success!" as Death cried, excitement sparkling in her eyes as she took in the sweeping panorama from the deck. Caesar soared above once in triumphant circles. Then, with controlled grace, the colossal dragon banked and descended, landing squarely on the deck with a ground-shaking thud. Charles exhaled, heart pounding. Caesar had done it. Chapter 385, Sky Island. "Ha! I'm beat!" Caesar crashed onto the deck, lying flat as he gasped for breath. "Nice landing," as Death said, stepping up beside him. Caesar sprang to his feet, scratched his head, and peered at the world around him. Clouds stretched in every direction, an endless sea of white mist. "Are we in a sea of clouds?" he murmured. On the starboard rail, Robert, Dedara, and the other crew members leaned over, marveling at shapes drifting beneath that looked like soaring whales or flocks of cloudbirds. They'd never seen anything like it. Charles stood at the helm, eyes narrowed in concentration. He extended his senses, his special clairvoyant aura, outward until it painted the entire Sky Island region in vivid detail. There, rising on the horizon, was a floating island, its rocky cliffs crowned with lush green forests. "There," Charles declared, pointing south. "Set course for that island." "Aye, Captain," the helmsman replied. The ship's wheel clattered as the vessel turned, sails catching an otherworldly breeze. Moments later, the ship glided closer to the island's mist-shrouded shore. Caesar stumbled to the rail, eyes wide. It's actually made of clouds," he whispered in awe. Charles allowed himself a small smile. "Welcome to Sky Island. Let's see what secrets it holds." With that, the crew readied ropes and grappling hooks, anticipation crackling in the humid air. In the boundless sea of clouds, adventure was just beginning. Another pirate ship has appeared below Qinghai. The Sky Island sentinels spotted a massive vessel gliding across the Bye-Bye Sea. Ganfor's brow tightened. People from Qinghai again? It's getting lively around here. Let's hope they mean no harm. He rose and called, Pierre. At his command, a winged steed galloped forward. In an instant, Ganfor vaulted onto its back, and with powerful flaps, they climbed into the sky, heading toward the floating isle. Ganfor squinted down at the ship. Is this an uncharted island? Below, the pirate vessel eased into the harbor carved from cloud. Along the rail, a cluster of children, small, wiry figures known among the sentinels as the ghost brats, pressed their cheeks against the wood, staring up at the towering island. My lungs are on fire, one youngster gasped. Klein and his friends clutched their throats, faces flushed. At several thousand meters up, the air's brutal, Klein admitted. But we're tough. We'll adjust. Just then, the hatch popped open. Charles stepped out, flanked by his wives, Irina and the others. The moment the children caught sight of them, they erupted in delighted shouts. Dad, Mom, and dashed forward across the deck. Irina offered a warm wave to the little group, their laughter echoing beneath the island's cloud-piercing spires. A massive, translucent bubble drifted overhead, instantly saturating the air with fresh oxygen. The children inhaled it greedily, relief spreading across their faces. Charles glanced at Elena, who gave him a knowing, almost amused smile. Oxygen bubbles, she said lightly. Nothing to write home about. Charles returned her smile, then lifted his gaze to the sky. There, a lone rider soared above them on the back of a strange creature, part bird, part horse. Charles's eyes widened in recognition. It was the guardian of Sky Island, though the exact name escaped him in the moment. All around him, the crew of the Rockefeller pirates looked up in astonishment. The figure above bore white, feathered wings and sat astride the winged steed like some celestial messenger. Are they angels? A sailor whispered, awestruck. No, no, no. Ganfall shouted as he vaulted onto the ship's rail to get closer to the spectacle. We're the people of Sky Island, not angels. These wings, they don't even let us fly. Before he could finish, a sudden swish tore through the air. A blade of crackling sword energy sliced perilously close to Ganfall's brow. He froze, panic surging through him as cold sweat dotted his forehead. The razor-sharp arc of light vanished, then to the sky, leaving nothing but the hum of tension rippling through the deck. They landed on the cloud-pierced platform that served as Sky Island's grand docking station. Pierre, the Rockefeller pirate's keen-eyed falcon scout, flapped his wings and whimpered as Esdeath stood before him, sword drawn. I don't take kindly to anyone looking down on me, he squawked, feathers bristling. Esdeath didn't bother answering Pierre. Her cold gaze went straight to the figure descending from the sky palace above. At the sight of her, Ganfall, self-proclaimed god and ruler of Sky Island, stumbled mid-flight, panic in his eyes. He folded his wings and touched down hastily, nearly tripping over his own robes. Charles stepped forward, drawing everyone's attention. He gave Ganfall a polite nod, then turned to his crew. I'm Charles of the Rockefeller Pirates, he announced. We've come for a tour of Sky Island. Ganfall smoothed his robes, raised his chin, and swept his arms wide. Welcome to my domain, he proclaimed with a flourish. I am Ganfall, divinely appointed sovereign of these skies. You may address me as your grace. Charles cocked an eyebrow. A god, huh? That's an old-fashioned title. The last fellow who called himself a god met his end over 10 years ago. Color rose beneath Ganfall's feathers. He took a quick, anxious step back. No disrespect intended, your grace. It's purely ceremonial, no different from any monarch's title. Charles shrugged and folded his arms. Very well. We only wish to look around. Do you intend to stand in our way? A tense silence fell over the platform. At Charles's words, almost every Rockefeller pirate instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons, ready for whatever came next. Charles's voice was cold and unyielding. If you dare refuse, I'll make sure your blood stains this very spot. Gonfowler's face drained of color. He wiped his clammy brow, heart pounding. He'd never before encountered a force like this, especially not since that young woman's display of power. Yes, of course. At Kongdao, we welcome friends from Qinghai above all others. Charles allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Then he turned to the deck of the Rockefeller pirates' ship. All right, everyone. Let's disembark. We'll spend some time exploring Sky Island, unwind a bit. We'll be staying here for a while. The crew burst into cheers. Long live the captain. Long live Dad. The earlier sky tsunami had left many still on edge, and the thin atmosphere up here only heightened their tension. Even Esdeath, their stalwart swordswoman, had drawn her blade more than once when she sensed dissent. From the shore, Gonfor watched the thousands of pirates erupting in jubilation and felt a flicker of apprehension. Would these marauders lay waste to his island? Charles surveyed his crew with easy confidence, then fixed his gaze on Ganfor. "Now," he said, voice crisp, "Sky Island's own deity, tell me, when the Roger pirates arrived here, where did they go?" "I have to see it." Ganfor studied Charles's eager grin, a pang of guilt washing over him. "All right, no problem. The Roger pirates stayed on Sky Island for 2 days, then set sail for Shandora." He pointed toward a distant horizon shrouded in swirling clouds and mist. Charles squinted into the haze, certain in his heart that the Golden City lay hidden beyond. "Thank you," he said. "But one more thing. How do I get there from Bika?" "Bika," Charles repeated. "I'm pretty sure there's an island called Bika just south of Sky Island. Almost no one goes there." At the name Bika, Gonfor's face brightened. "Yes, south!" Charles turned his gaze to the southern sky, then nodded. "That's perfect. And don't worry, my crew won't disturb the peace here on Sky Island." Ganfor relaxed, clearly relieved that Charles meant no harm. Charles offered him a warm smile. "I appreciate your help, my generous friend." Overcome with gratitude, Ganfor bowed deeply. Charles waved him off and signaled to his ship's crew. "All right, everyone, let's go ashore. Be sure to pay close attention to the customs and traditions of Sky Island." Charles called out, leaping off the boat before anyone else. "Dad, do you have any pocket money?" Klein and the others didn't hesitate. They jumped down beside Charles and, wiping away tears of excitement, turned to their father with hopeful, upturned faces. Chapter 386. Charles watched the 6-year-olds clamoring for money and sighed. "Quit pestering me. Go ask your mother. I'm almost out of cash." He didn't even carry any small change these days, only gold coins. Before the kids could argue, Klein piped up, "Mom!" Elena rolled her eyes, reached into her belt pouch, and drew out a handful of gleaming coins. "All right, but pace yourselves. Don't spend it all at once." "Thank you, Mom," the children chorused, scrambling forward. Klein beamed as he divided the coins among his siblings, but Robert gave him a hopeful look and tugged on Elena's sleeve. "Mom, me too." Elena sighed and pulled out a few more coins. "Fine. Here. Now leave me alone." "Thanks, Mama Elena," they cried in unison. Deidara let out a whoop of delight and stuffed his share into his pockets. With purses now full, the little pirates danced around the deck, their laughter echoing over the waves. Off to the side, Ganfor stared at them with wide-eyed awe, as if he'd just sighted the god of fortune itself. He never imagined this crew could be so wealthy, more prosperous even than the famed Roger pirates. Charles and the rest of the Roger pirates had been on Sky Island for 2 days, and scarcely spent a penny. With their vast hoard of belly, even the youngest crew member could easily draw tens of thousands at a time. If you converted it into the old ace coins, the rate was 1 to 10,000. "Ha! Welcome to Sky Island," called Gonfor, sweeping an arm toward the bazaar stalls. "There's all sorts of wonders up here, like this sound shell which stores music." He pulled a small spiral shell from his pack and pressed it into the children's hands. Robert gave it a curious twist, and at once a lively tune poured forth. The youngster's eyes sparkled. In awe, Robert whispered, "That's incredible." Ganfor chuckled. "That's only the beginning. We've got lamp shells that glow, water shells that carry fresh spring water, image shells that replay entire scenes. Anything you can imagine. As long as you've got the belly, it's yours." He practically transformed into a whirlwind salesman, darting from one group of buyers to the next, extolling each Sky Island specialty with feverish enthusiasm. Even the usually unflappable Barrett found himself drawn in by the spectacle. Charles smiled to himself. "Enjoy the market," he told the crew. "Buy whatever you like. I'm going to venture deeper into the island for a while. If anything comes up, send for me." With that, he turned and strode off toward the lush interior of Sky Island, leaving the others to revel in the wonders at Ganfor's stall. Charles had barely taken a few steps before he vaulted up and slipped out of sight. The Rockefeller pirates were accustomed to their captain's silent departures. Charles preferred to handle certain matters alone. There was too much gold in Shantora, and he didn't want to tempt anyone's greed. Far better, that he alone know its hiding place. Once he was gone, the mood among the crew shifted instantly. Spread out before them on the sand lay a dazzling array of exotic seashells. Not only the children, but seasoned sailors too bent over the treasures with greedy interest. They'd just counted their share of the day's spoils and now set their eyes on a more lucrative prize, these shells themselves. Ganfor, commander of the God's Guard, held up the first specimen. "This is a wind shell," he announced. "It stores compressed air. When released, it can power a skateboard or skates for rapid movement, hence its popularity with Sky Island warriors. Concentrate the gas, and it can even detonate." Robert, fascinated, leaned in to examine its spiraled surface. Ganfor then produced another shell, this one glowing faintly red. "This is a fire shell. It absorbs and contains thermal energy, then unleashes it as a controlled burst of flame. It's invaluable for assault tactics, creating barriers of fire, or simply breaking an enemy's will." A ripple of excitement ran through the crew. Word spread fast. These shells weren't mere curiosities. They were commodities. Several savvy pirates quietly discussed setting up as middlemen, buying low here and selling high across the archipelago. By evening, deals were struck on the deserted island shore, each man eager to turn his share of shells into a small fortune. Meanwhile, Charles worked alone in the jungle's shadow, certain that keeping his gold secret was the first step toward ruling the seas. But on the beach below, his crew had already found their own path to wealth, and they intended to make a killing. Charles stood among the onlookers as Ganfor produced a compact, fiery red shell from his satchel. "This," the trader announced with a flourish, "can cut down foes and ignite the air. It's indispensable at home and on the road." He then unveiled a second device, a polished orb etched with spiraling runes. "And this," he continued, "is the absorption shell. It soaks up the force of any shockwave, then stores it for later release. Sky Island warriors rely on it for defense." A ripple of excitement swept through the crowd. Charles felt his pulse quicken. An artifact that could bank and redirect raw energy? Unbelievable. Whispers rose around him as curious hands stretched forward, eager to examine the shells. "Let me try," rising to her feet. Ganfor nodded and signaled to the captain beside him. With practiced ease, the captain flipped open the absorption shell's hinged cover. Across the circle, Deidara clenched his fist. A crackling aura of destructive power coalesced around his knuckles. The captain's eyes narrowed, and a tense hush fell over the gathering. Then, with a thunderous roar, boom, Deidara unleashed his strike. Charles's heart leapt as the shockwave rocketed toward the shell. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then the orb pulsed with a pale light, drawing the explosion inward as if swallowing a tidal wave. When the glow faded, not even a ripple had escaped. Gasps rose from the crowd. Faces that had braced for fallout stared in stunned silence. Deidara's pupils constricted in disbelief, his most powerful blow completely negated by this small device. Charles felt a surge of exhilaration. If such a shell existed, the balance of power might shift in an instant, and he intended to find out how. The unfortunate souls who touched that little shell were stripped of their bones, and then absorbed into its tiny cavity. "I'll take it! Give me everything you've got!" Robert shouted, eyes alight as he watched Deidara slump in defeat. Deidara's shoulders sagged, but Ganfor simply let a greedy grin spread across his face. "Behold the shock shell. It unleashes a concussive wave so powerful it can shatter armor, though its recoil can kill the unprepared. Only Sky Island's strongest warriors can harness it." He paused to let the words sink in, then raised the shell higher. Instantly, the crowd's covetous murmurs swelled into a roar. Banknotes fluttered like leaves in a storm as bidders clamored for the shock shell. Sensing his stock was almost gone, Ganfor dipped behind his display. When he emerged, he held aloft an even more magnificent treasure. And now, the final prize, the most potent shell on Sky Island, the slashing shell. It absorbs any sword strike, stores that energy, and lets its master unleash it at will. Truly the bane of every swordsman. A stunned hush fell over the hall. "The bane of swordsmen?" the audience echoed, disbelief plain on their faces. Ganfor felt the temperature drop. He swallowed hard, muttered, "Oh dear," and steeled himself, even as scowls and wary glances closed in around him. "Don't underestimate this shell," Ganfor warned. It can absorb sword slashes, but only those delivered by men trained in swordsmanship. Against a true swordsman's full power, it's useless. Push it beyond its limits, and it simply breaks. Is that so? Let me try, Esther said coolly. Something about her calm confidence set Ganfor on edge. He studied the young woman who'd attacked him earlier. She tilted her head, curious. How do I use it? She asked. Realizing he had no choice, Ganfor nodded to his guards. One of them stepped forward, took the shell, and held it out to Esther. Go ahead, swing your sword. Without channeling any special energy, Esther raised her Western-style blade and brought it down on the shell. Clang! The clang of steel on steel rang out. The guard's arms shook violently from the impact, and he stared at Esther in astonishment. Then he turned his attention to the shell. It was spiderwebbed with fine cracks, a clear sign that just one more strike at that force would shatter it completely. Ganfor exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Esther stepped closer, her gray eyes unwavering. Let me see it, she said. The guard, still trembling, loosened his grip and handed her the damaged shell. Esther examined the fractures with a thoughtful hush, as the courtyard fell silent around them. Chapter 387, The Golden City. Esdeath's challenge drew the guard's gaze to General Ganfor. He, too, was curious to see just how formidable this young swordswoman truly was, and he swore it had nothing to do with the slight she'd just dealt him by knocking aside his explosive shell. With a flick of his wrist, the guard snapped open the slashing shell he carried. Immediately, a razor-sharp arc of energy burst forth, heading straight for the gates behind Esdeath. She frowned, raised her western sword in a single fluid motion, and sliced the attack into the sky, where it scattered into harmless sparks. That was barely 5% of your original power, Esdeath remarked coolly as she lowered her sword. Is that really your limit? Ganfor flushed with embarrassment. Only moments ago, he'd been confident he'd blown the entire shell into the stratosphere, yet she'd dispatched it so effortlessly that his own pride felt seared. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. Don't be so sure. We have more to show you. He motioned to his men, who produced curious new devices one by one. Try our power board, he announced, brandishing a sleek palm-sized plate. Step on this, and you can dart across the Golden City faster than the wind. The soldiers watched eagerly, their earlier chagrin forgotten as they eyed the futuristic gadget. Ganfor held the glowing board aloft, excitement dancing in his eyes. Despite their repeated setbacks, they hoped this invention might finally give them the upper hand against Esdeath's overwhelming might. Esdeath's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Very well, she said. Let's see what this power board can do. With that, the stage was set for the next surprising twist in the streets of the Golden City. Charles's mount, Pierre, had collapsed into the heap of gold coins and was gleefully rolling in them as though he'd struck the grandest jackpot. Charles could only shake his head at his horse's antics. There was more pressing business at hand. He pivoted and dashed toward Shantara. Each time Shantara ducked, Charles reappeared hundreds of meters away in an instant. His speed was like lightning, his gaze unblinking. Beneath Charles's commanding aura, the air seemed to pulse with energy, guiding him to a single point. As he approached a mighty oak, he sensed an immense life force coiled just beyond its roots. Charles peered around the trunk and froze. A colossal serpent, easily 400 meters long, lay draped around the tree, its scales faintly shimmering even in slumber. Lord of the Sky? Charles whispered, recalling the legends of aerial leviathans. The snake's flanks bore scars from some furious battle, no doubt the work of the Roger pirates. Charles offered a nod of respect, then tore his eyes away and pressed on. Beyond a bend in the rocky path, the world changed entirely. A city of pure gold, every spire, wall, and rooftop glowed with a warm, amber light. Even though Charles had steeled himself for wonders, nothing could prepare him for this. He had journeyed far and seen marvels, but standing here, bathed in the city's brilliance, he felt his heart quicken with awe. Charles had never been so awestruck by gold in his life. He stepped into the city and stopped dead in his tracks. Towering walls, spires, even the streets were forged from gleaming yellow metal. Is this really a city made of gold? He thought, heart-pounding. In front of him loomed a massive golden slab, smooth, untouched, and impossibly pure. There must be over 1 trillion Baileys worth of gold here, he whispered, scarcely daring to believe it. Gathering his courage, Charles moved forward. His eyes roamed over ornate arches and statues, each detail carved from solid gold. When he brushed a fingertip against the wall, a surge of energy flowed into the castle bracelet on his wrist. The moment he made contact, tiny flakes of gold dissolved into a soft glow and streamed into the bracelet's hidden chambers. With every stroke of his hand, more metal vanished from sight and slotted neatly into the haunted device. From now on, he vowed aloud, I'll never call myself poor again. He quickened his pace. Tarnished chunks, broken ornaments, even flakes of gilding all yielded to his touch. Yet despite the bracelet filling faster than he'd ever imagined possible, the vast majority of the city's treasure remained untouched, a single drop in an infinite ocean of wealth. Still, Charles didn't stop. He swept through golden plazas and down shimmering avenues, collecting with relentless efficiency. In less than half a day, he had siphoned away roughly half the city's gold. His castle bracelet was packed to bursting. For a moment, Charles paused, worried he'd reached its limit. But then, on impulse, he willed it to expand. The compartments stretched wider, the internal space reshaped itself to accommodate an even greater bounty. With a thrill of triumph, he pressed on. At last, Charles emerged into the city's heart, where a solitary stone monument rose from a golden plaza. He approached it slowly, curiosity burning. What secrets might this final relic hold in a city crafted entirely of gold? Charles paused before the weathered gray stone tablet, its surface etched with strange, looping characters. Above him, a massive golden clock loomed, its pendulum swinging in slow, measured arcs. He'd half expected a dusty relic. What he hadn't expected was the surge of warmth that rippled through his chest the moment he laid a trembling finger on the stone. A genuine grin crept onto his face as an unexpected euphoria welled up inside him. "What is this?" he whispered, stunned by the laughter bubbling from his lips. His own voice echoed back at him as he laughed again, deeper and freer than he'd laughed in years. Could this be what Joy Boy meant? He wondered aloud. In his mind's ear, a clear, joyful voice rang out, "The inheritance of will." Charles closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. Though the tablet's inscriptions remained indecipherable, he could almost feel two spirits bound within the rock, Joy Boy's and that of the pirate king, Gol D Roger, both legendary men forever linked by their laughter and their destinies. "Incredible," he murmured. Straightening, he laid a respectful hand flat on the tablet. "I won't tuck you away in my pack," he decided, voice soft with reverence. "Leave you here, and maybe you'll call out to the next soul brave enough to listen." He backed away, leaving the tablet in place, then turned his gaze to the towering clock beside him. Resting his chin in his hand, he studied the glittering gears through the glass face, each tick counting down the secrets still hidden in this cavernous hall. What wonders, he wondered, were yet to come? He vaulted onto the rim of the golden bell and, with his gaze fixed, swung his right leg in a powerful arc. His foot connected with a thunderous clang. The resonance rolled across the archipelago, Apaido, Sky Island, Gaia Island, carrying the bell's cry on the wind. Wherever the sound fell, heads lifted in unison, eyes searching the heavens. "The ancestors' prophecy has been fulfilled," an elder from Apaido cried, voice crackling with awe. "When Shandora's bell tolls, the people of Apaido and Sky Island shall walk together beneath these clouds." Nearby, a frail old man teetered, and a young companion steadied him. "Gaia Island, the bell, it's the legendary golden bell," the youth gasped. "Sky Island, it's real. All of it." 100 pirate crews looked skyward, murmuring in disbelief. The myth was true. Gaia Island hovered alive above the waves, and now the very air of Sky Island pulsed with excitement. "That direction," Caesar said, shading his eyes against the glare. "I'm almost certain Father went that way just now. Do you think he's up there?" Esdeath glanced at him. "We should wait for him to return. Then we can decide what to do." Caesar nodded, pushing aside his curiosity. He forced himself to settle, though his mind raced with questions about what lay beyond the clouds. Ganfor sat motionless on the throne, his gaze fixed on the faint echo of bells hatch above. He no longer heard the merchant's calls or the courtier's chatter, only the lingering chime that had stirred questions in his mind. After handing the conch shell to the guard at the gate, he had mounted his steed, Pierre, and ridden back to the palace as swiftly as the wind. Now, Slumping forward, he murmured to himself, could it be that Kongdao is truly ready to make peace with Appayado? In the chamber beside him, Charles frowned up at the swaying golden clock suspended from the ceiling. As soon as its pendulum swung to a stop, he closed his eyes, silently drew it toward him, and slipped it into the enchanted bracelet on his wrist. Your final task is done, he declared, voice low but triumphant, and the clock is mine. He swept the last gleaming coins into his satchel, leaving only a single, time-worn manuscript among the treasure. A full day's haul, and now the return journey lay before him. No sooner had he gathered his cloak than a thunderous buzzing split the air. "Lord of the Sky!" someone cried, and Charles looked up in alarm. There, coiling across the heavens, was the great sky serpent, its luminous scales stretching nearly 400 meters from head to tail. It blocked the palace's grand archway, an immense and silent guardian above the world. Charles straightened, meeting the creature's vast gaze. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, stepping forward, but keeping his tone calm. To his surprise, the serpent recoiled slightly, its massive head dipping in hesitation. Memories of a recent defeat by a human warrior still lingered in its mind, and now, at the very sight of humankind, it showed an unusual flicker of fear. Yet despite its size and power, it made no hostile move. It simply hovered, great eyes unblinking, as if curious what the young man below would do next. "Roll!" Charles bellowed, his oppressive aura erupting like a wave of purgatory crashing down on the Lord of the Sky. Startled by the sudden onslaught, the Lord of the Sky recoiled and fled in terror. Chapter 388. Bika Charles watched the fleeing Sky Lord disappear over the horizon without a second thought, and turned his gaze toward Sky Island. Years of wandering had tempered the savage edge he'd once carried. His old thirst for blood had all but faded. He remembered his younger self, brash and headstrong, always charging in feet first. Now, as he approached the island's entrance, he slowed, bowing his head in respect. A lone sentinel named Xia Luo stepped forward, blade at the ready. Without a word, they exchanged a brief, curved salute, no formal greeting required between warriors who understood each other's reputations. Soon Charles reached the Rockefeller pirates' camp, set among drifting clouds at the island's rim. The moment he appeared, a chorus of voices rose in unison. "Captain! Captain!" Crew members scrambled forward, clapping him on the shoulder, eager to report their latest finds and victories. Charles acknowledged each with a slight nod, but kept his eyes fixed on the heart of the camp. He carried himself with the quiet authority he'd earned over countless battles, an authority inspired by legends like Whitebeard, Golden Lion, and the fabled Lingling. At the center of the bustling camp, a group of island children gathered around a crate of exotic souvenirs. Sky Island's famed Sora shells, their iridescent spirals glowing like captured starlight. The kids passed them back and forth, marveling at the shell's tinkling song when held to the wind. Charles allowed himself a small, rare smile. No matter how far his journeys took him, moments like these, simple, peaceful, rooted in home, were what truly mattered. "Dad," little Simon, his stubby legs carrying him as fast as they could, barreled toward Charles and threw his arms around his father's knees. Charles bent down, tussling Simon's hair. "What is it, son?" With shining eyes, Simon flipped open the delicate seashell clasp dangling from his neck, and a soft melody drifted from within. He listened, entranced by the gentle tune. Charles smiled affectionately. "And your mother?" Simon pointed back toward the waiting ship. "She's on board." Nodding, Charles patted Simon on the head and led him back toward the gangplank. The sun was lowering in the sky, and after 3 days of exploring that uninhabited island, everyone was ready to rest. By the next morning, Charles set their course southward for Bika, an island on the fringes of Sky Island. Thanks to the navigation charts Gan 4 had provided, they reached it without delay. From the deck, Charles surveyed the lush peaks rising into mist, an island fated, the legend said, to be obliterated by the storm god Inero in just 12 years' time. Once anchored in the calm bay, Charles mustered the crew on deck. "All right," he announced, "the captain's orders, we search for the thunder fruit." Earlier that morning, he'd distributed detailed illustrations of the rare fruit, so there'd be no confusion over what to look for. And if anyone wondered why Charles had prepared so thoroughly, they needed only look at Enelu, still only 12 years old at the time. to see how crucial each moment of discovery could be. No one could say how long it would be before Charles finally got his hands on the thunder fruit, if it even still existed on Bika Island. With its dense forests and scattered villages, the island was home to thousands of people. To cover every acre, Barrett knew they had to cast their net wide. Gather every man, woman, and child on Bika, he ordered the Rockefeller pirates. And if anyone resists, kill them. 1,000 pirates cheered in response, and the peaceful island erupted into chaos. Wherever the pirate patrols marched, villagers who dared to stand their ground fell beneath the cutlasses of Charles's crew. Within hours, survivors from every village had been rounded up and driven into the central square. Barrett stood before the captive crowd, his face impassive in the morning light. "I brought you all here for one reason," he announced, and from beneath his coat he produced a small photograph. He held it aloft so that everyone could see. A brightly colored fruit crackling with tiny arcs of lightning. "This fruit is hidden somewhere on your island," Barrett said. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then continued, "You have 3 days to find it. Fail, and Bika will be destroyed." A roar rose from the terrified inhabitants, echoing across the plaza. Barrett allowed himself a small, cold smile. The hunt for the thunder fruit had begun. Charles watched the 5-meter-tall man on the dais loom over the square. His voice thundered out, "Split into search parties. You have 3 days to find the thunder fruit. Fail, and we'll drown Bika in blood." Seated behind Commander Barrett, Charles gave a casual wave to the nearby soldiers. But his gaze kept drifting to a lone boy in the crowd. The boy's earlobes hung nearly to his shoulders, and, unlike everyone else from Bika, he had no wings. Charles's heart skipped a beat. That had to be Anilu. Clutching a weathered sketch of the fruit, Anilu stared up at the blonde giant, hatred burning in his eyes. Charles felt a jolt of alarm. If Anilu had information about the thunder fruit, it could tip the balance. At the giant's command, the square emptied in minutes. Teams fanned out through the city, upturned every cart and stall. Shouts echoed as desperate villagers held up various fruits, hoping one matched the sketch. When the fruit proved wrong, soldiers executed a few unlucky souls on the spot. The rest, seeing the carnage, dropped to their knees and begged for mercy, clutching the nearest produce. Amid the chaos, Anilu knelt alone, his drawing pressed tight in both hands. Finally he spoke, voice low but steady. "Stay here. I'm going out." Charles rose to his feet. Caesar, ever restless, slipped in beside him. "Have you got anything yet?" Caesar muttered. Charles shook his head, eyes fixed on the gates. "Not yet, but I'm going after him." Chapter 7. The Hunt for the Fruit. "Take care of yourself," Esdeath murmured, casting a sidelong glance at Caesar. He trembled at her words, but said nothing. From the moment Enel set out, Charles's overwhelming aura had clung to him like a shadow. He followed Enel and Caesar through twisting paths until they emerged into a dense forest. There, they came upon a lone, thatch-roofed cottage nestled between ancient oaks. Enel stormed forward and slammed a fist against the doorframe. "Damn it! Why can't I find it?" he snarled. "If I could only lay my hands on that fruit in the painting, I'd plead with his lord to obliterate Bika Island and every last soul on it." Perched silently on a low branch above, Charles frowned. He hadn't come all this way just to listen to Enel vent. With a swift leap, he dropped behind the furious man and gripped his shoulder firmly. In an instant, Charles activated his observation Haki, delving into Enel's mind. Every hidden thought, every scrap of yearning spilled into Charles's awareness. Enel's eyes rolled back, and he swayed as if the world had gone dark. Charles released him and shook his head. "There's nothing here, Enel. No trace of the fruit." Defeated, Enel slumped against the door. Charles slipped away, vanishing into the forest as silently as he'd arrived. Back in the town square, Charles sank into a wooden chair beside the old stone fountain, cradling a steaming cup of tea. 2 days had already passed. He was on his 4th pot, and still no news of the mysterious fruit. Tomorrow would be day 3 of his search. Charles stood atop the dais, glaring down at the gathered villagers, their faces pale with dread. "Today is your last chance," he announced, his voice cold and unyielding. "If by tonight I receive no word, I will slaughter every one of you, and this island will burn with your corpses. Do not even think of fleeing. Every inch of Bika is under my watch, and I know your every move." Silence fell over the crowd as his words rang out. The people of Bika stared up at him, terror etched on their features. At length, a young man at the front stammered, "Your Majesty, we've searched all of Bika, every forest, every valley, even the caves, but we have found no trace of the fruit you described." An elderly villager rose on unsteady legs, voice shaking. "Please, Your Majesty, we are doing everything we can." Charles's eyes hardened as he regarded the old man. He shook his head slowly and spoke without emotion. "I don't care. If the fruit I demand does not appear by nightfall, I will kill you all." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. The threat settled over them like a death knell. At once, the villagers scattered, frantically combing through every corner of the island in search of the mysterious fruit depicted in the ancient painting. Moments later, a middle-aged man broke away from the crowd and hurried to the village chief. "Chief, could the fruit be hidden in the old temple?" he gasped. At this, the village chief's face drained of color, and he exchanged a troubled look with the anxious man. The fate of Bika, and of every soul on it, hung in the balance. After ensuring they were truly alone, Charles cast a frantic glance around the room and then fixed a menacing stare on the middle-aged man. Chapter 389, Thunderfruit. Standing on the raised platform, Charles froze at the mention of the temple. Temple? What temple? He leapt down and strode over to the village chief. "Old man," he demanded, catching the chief's gaze. "What temple was just mentioned?" The chief's eyes darted nervously. "The temple, sir. It's where we Bika villagers offer our worship." Charles narrowed his eyes. "Have you been searching for it?" "No," the chief stammered. "But I swear it's not there yet. No one goes near it except during the sacrificial rites." Under Charles's unrelenting stare, the old man's voice faltered. Charles drew himself to full height. "Then take me to this temple." "Yes, my lord," the chief whispered, trembling. Charles turned and addressed the middle-aged man standing nearby. "And you, do you know where it is?" The man swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, sir, I know the way." Without warning, Charles's fist rocketed forward and struck the village chief squarely on the side of the head. The old man collapsed in a heap. Charles fixed the middle-aged man with a cold glare. "Lead on. Take me to the temple." "Back off, or you'll end up like him," Charles snarled in a surprisingly deep voice, gesturing toward the former village chief, his skull smashed in a gruesome display. Though the middle-aged guide bowed submissively before him, Charles caught the flicker of contempt in his eyes. It reminded him all too well of the haughty looks he'd seen from colonial officers in his past life. The guide's gaze darted nervously between Charles and the bleeding body at his feet. His face went ashen. "Move," Charles ordered coldly. "Yes!" the man stammered, nearly tripping over his own feet as he hustled Charles and the accompanying party toward the looming temple. Esdeath paused long enough to kick the chief's corpse aside with a disdainful smirk before striding after them. Caesar, too, cast a cursory glance at the fallen man. "Honestly," he scoffed, "if you're going to threaten someone, at least have the sense to back it up." They pressed on in Esdeath's wake, weaving through overgrown pathways until the massive stone facade of the temple rose before them. Charles froze. Its triangular reliefs, the sweeping spires, even the weathered insignia carved above the entrance, they all matched the arc emblem he'd admired in that one anime. His heart pounded. This was it. Everything he'd risked, every drop of sweat and blood, it had led him here. He stepped forward, resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever lay beyond those gates, Charles knew with absolute certainty that it was exactly what he'd come to find. Charles shoved the middle-aged guide aside and strode into the temple's shadowy interior. As he passed, he caught snippets of the man's hurried explanation. This was a shrine devoted to a winged deity, a birdman at its center. Now, facing the colossal statue, Charles understood why. Perched on a marble pedestal, the man-bird figure held a gilded tray in one hand and a locked box in the other. Charles paid little heed to the deity itself. His gaze was fixed on the tray and on the golden durian-shaped devil fruit etched with crackling lightning patterns. His pulse quickened. He'd chased rumors of this thunder fruit for 3 days straight. Without hesitation, Charles vaulted up the pedestal, seized the devil fruit, and tucked it under his arm. Then, with a swift twist of his wrist, he pried open the box in the statue's other hand. Inside lay a bundle of finely rolled parchments, the blueprints for the legendary flying ship Ark Proverbs. He unrolled the drawings. Although the annotations were penned in an unfamiliar script, the vessel's contours were unmistakable and curiously reminiscent of the temple itself, from its curved prow down to the sweeping arch of its hull. A triumphant grin spread across Charles's face. This had been far too easy. Devil fruit in hand and ship schematics secured, he stepped back and methodically inspected the chamber. Every pillar, niche, and carving had his attention. He refused to lay until he'd uncovered every last secret this temple held. Charles stepped outside the ancient temple and paused to double-check his surroundings, even casting his vision over every shadowed corridor and carved pillar to be sure nothing had been overlooked. Satisfied that the place held no hidden surprises, he emerged into the bright sunlight clutching two precious prizes. "Dad, did you find it?" Caesar called eagerly, eyes fixed on the strange fruit and the small treasure chest in Charles's hands. Charles grinned and held the glowing orb aloft. "Found it, at last. Behold, the thunder fruit, the most potent natural devil fruit known to man." He closed his fingers around its crackling surface. After all the years he'd spent chasing rumors and legends during his time-slip adventures, this was the moment he'd dreamed of. "Let's get out of here," he shouted. The rest of the crew fell into formation behind him as Barrett raised his arm, signaling to the sky. Minutes later, every ship in Bika's hidden harbor was under full sail. Charles spared a last glance at the island's rugged silhouette. He wondered whether Enelu, the boy who'd crashed here 3 days ago and now lay unconscious, would ever wake, let alone see his home undisturbed. But there was no time to delay. As the fleet slipped away from the reef, Charles allowed himself a final thrill of triumph. Later, in the quiet of the captain's cabin, he laid the thunder fruit beside another glowing prize, the elusive tuntun fruit. He'd originally intended to present them to Tesla and Caesar, but the more he studied their swirling patterns of power, the more he found himself wondering, which of his crewmates would these gifts serve best, and what new horizons might they open? With a satisfied smile, Charles leaned back in his chair and let the sea breeze carry him toward his next great adventure. Charles stepped from the secure chamber, clutching 2 devil fruits. He made his way down to the ship's lowest deck, where Tesla was bent over a tangle of blueprints and lab equipment alongside the royal scientists. "Tesla," Charles called softly. Startled, Tesla looked up. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Charles smiled, eyes gleaming. "I brought something special for you. I hope you like it." With a flourish, he set one of the fruits on the table, its golden skin crackling with tiny arcs of lightning. "This is the sound thunder fruit." Tesla's eyes went wide. "The thunder fruit? You found it?" "I did," Charles said, pride in his voice. "I promised I'd find a devil fruit that suited you. Nothing could be more perfect. This fruit will supercharge your research and give you the power you need in the field." He placed the crackling orb gently into Tesla's hands. Tesla stared at it, overwhelmed by the weight of his father's dedication. Tears welled in his eyes. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered, voice thick. "I don't know how to repay you." Charles ruffled his son's hair. "Seeing you succeed is all the thanks I need." "Dad!" Charles called out, rushing to Tesla's side. Tesla's eyes brimmed with tears. "Ha! You're moved, of course. You're my son. Who else would care for you like I do? Now eat up. I want to see the appetite of nature's strongest boy." Charles placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "All right, but not here. If you spill anything, these instruments will be ruined." Tesla waved a dismissive hand and glanced at the bank of delicate electronic devices. "Fine, then fetch Professor Caesar Courant. I have a special gift for him, too." "Okay," Charles agreed, and Tesla hurried off toward Caesar's lab. The door stood ajar, revealing the professor hunched over a cluttered workbench. Bottles bubbled with strange concoctions, and her hair was tangled, clear signs she hadn't slept or bathed in days. "Professor Courant," Tesla called softly as he stepped inside. "I need your expertise." Tesla had always addressed her as teacher. From the moment he first developed his passion for science, he had sought out Caesar Courant's guidance. There was no one in the world he respected him at. "D. Moore, are you all right?" Caesar Courant looked up at the voice beside him and saw Tesla standing quietly at his side. Chapter 390, Tesla's Gift. Caesar Courant set down the instrument in his hand and glanced up at Tesla. Just now you said the captain wants to see me? Tesla nodded, a broad grin spreading across his face. That's right. He's brought you a gift. Caesar's eyes lit up. Do you know what it is? Tesla shrugged. No clue. He's waiting for you outside. Go find out. With little choice, Caesar followed Tesla out of the laboratory. In the hallway, he spotted Charles leaning casually against the bulkhead. Charles's untamed hair stuck out in every direction, and dark circles under his eyes hinted at many sleepless nights. But his smile was as sharp as ever. Caesar, Charles said, stepping forward. Remember when I promised to find you a devil fruit that really suits your research? Well, here it is. Charles withdrew a strange mottled purple fruit from inside his lab coat and handed it to Caesar. I swapped your gas fruit for this new one. Compared to your old fruit, the tun-tun fruit is far more promising. Caesar turned the fruit over in his hands, marveling at its rippled skin. Tun-tun fruit, he murmured. Once you eat it, you can consume anything, objects, substances, and assimilate them into your body. You could even recombine the elements to create entirely new materials. Charles nodded. Exactly. Imagine the breakthroughs in alchemy and synthesis you can achieve. I can't wait to see what you'll do with it. A thrill ran through Caesar's veins. With this gift in hand, the possibilities were limitless. He gripped the tun-tun fruit tightly, already planning his first experiment. Charles handed the bulging, mottled tun-tun fruit to Caesar Courant and spoke as plainly as he could. This devil fruit lets you literally eat your own flesh and reshape your body at will. The instant Caesar heard those words, his eyes lit up. With his keen scientific mind, he grasped the fruit's true worth. Cradling it like a treasure, he bowed low. Thank you, Captain. Charles waved him off. You've served the Rockefeller pirates loyally for 10 years. Of course I'd reward you. Right away, sir, Caesar said, his voice trembling with excitement. He took a deep breath and bit into the tun-tun fruit. Agony exploded in his mouth. Nausea, burning, the urge to heave overwhelmed him. He clamped a hand over his lips, fighting back every retch until he'd forced the fruit down. Then the pain receded, replaced by a strange humming energy deep in his bones. Without another word, Caesar dashed to his laboratory. He snatched up the one piece of experimental metal he'd never been able to fuse by any conventional means. Holding it carefully, he ate it whole, letting the iron cool against his tongue. A moment later, his stomach lurched, and he vomited the metal onto a steel workbench. Where once it had been a jagged, unsteady alloy, it now gleamed with perfectly fused seams and an intricate uniform pattern. Caesar's grin was unstoppable. Captain, this is beyond anything I imagined. Charles allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. One more step toward transforming the world. Charles and Caesar Courant stepped out onto the ship's deck, Tesla following close behind. The moment Tesla bit into the thunderfruit, the air around him crackled. White arcs of lightning snaked over his body, each bolt humming with raw, destructive power. Charles watched in wonder as Tesla began to rise from the deck, levitating slowly. With a calm gesture, Tesla gathered the storm's fury into his hand. A lance of pure lightning, instinctively called the Thunder Spear, formed in his grip. He hurled it skyward, and in an instant the spear transformed into a massive thunderbird, tearing across the heavens before detonating in a tremendous roar. The blast rattled the ship. Crew members spilled out of the cabins, drawn by the deafening crack. On deck, Charles stood with Caesar, eyes fixed upward where Tesla hovered, haloed in electric light. Caesar's jaw dropped. He's eaten the thunder fruit. Esdeath drew in a slow breath, her gaze cold and calculating. Tesla's new foe, on power-radiated lethal threat. One strike, and even she might fall. Tension crackled in the air as she clenched her fist. Then, with crystal clarity, she shouted, "Wanlei!" A bolt of energy answered her call, and the deck shuddered under the promise of an even greater storm. I saw Tesla lift his hand, and at once the sky above us darkened with rolling storm clouds. Thunder rumbled, and jagged bolts of lightning flashed through the gloom, striking the white-churned sea below. I couldn't help but grin in astonishment. To think that at just 13 years old, my second son could summon such power. Shaking my head, I called out, "Incredible, Tesla! You're only 13, and you've already mastered the 10,000 thunder technique." All around us, the other children stared up at their brother, who now hovered like a god of storms. But wielding such mighty forces took its toll. Tesla's face went pale. He floated down to the deck as the last of the thunderclouds dissolved overhead. It drained more energy than I expected, he admitted, his voice shaky. I can't hold it as long as I'd like. I need better control. A hush fell over the crew, then erupted into excited murmurs. At 13, Tesla had unleashed a technique most masters never fully command. His power might still be raw, they said, but his potential was boundless. If he continued to train with this fervor, there would be no limit to what he could achieve. Don't let research slow down your strength, Charles urged sharply. If he had to choose between Tesla's raw power and any amount of laboratory work, he'd choose power every time. The Thunderfruit granted such a tremendous boost that Charles wasn't about to let Tesla squander it on mere experiments. All right, got it, Tesla replied, eyes gleaming. In that instant, he'd felt unstoppable, as if he'd ascended to godhood. He let out a satisfied chuckle. You know what? From now on, call me Thor. He'd already envisioned his future name, Rockefeller Tesla. Over the years, the Rockefeller pirates had watched their newest prodigies rise to fame alongside Charles himself. Each had earned a fearsome nickname and a sky-high bounty. Douglas Barrett, the Devil's descendant and vice captain, carries a 6 billion berry bounty, second only to Charles's own 38 billion. Ice Queen Rockefeller Esdeath, the fleet's eldest daughter, boasts an 8 billion berry reward. Magic Dragon Rockefeller Caesar commands a 7 billion berry bounty, rounding out the trio of rising stars. Together with Charles, the irrefutable pirate king, these four have cemented the Rockefeller pirates' reputation as one of the most formidable crews on the seas. Caesar, Magic Dragon Rockefeller, eldest son of the Rockefeller pirates, carried a staggering 7 billion belly bounty. Over the years, as Charles continued his voyage, news of their clashes gradually reached Navy intelligence, and one by one, those bounties climbed higher. In Xia Luo's eyes, aside from Barrett's notoriously hefty reward, most of the recent increases must have been driven in part by Charles' deeds. Take Caesar's 7 billion belly price tag, for example. On paper, he wasn't even on par with a vice admiral, and his fighting style was hardly polished. Yet once he awakened the power of the Azure Dragon Fruit, he became a completely different opponent. He traded blows with Kozuki Odin, another vice admiral-ranked pirate, and even managed to land strikes against Charles himself. With the fruit's regenerative abilities and near-impenetrable defenses, Caesar could shrug off attacks that would fell most vice admirals and counterstrike with deadly force. In a straight fight, without some extraordinary trick, defeating Caesar was virtually impossible. Chapter 391, Domineering Training. Charles stood on the deck of the Rockefeller Pirates' flagship, scanning his 3 chief officers like a general appraising his captains. Each had shown immense talent, yet since their skirmish with the Roger pirates, glaring weaknesses had emerged, weaknesses Charles could no longer ignore. Barrett remained the most balanced of the lot. His mastery of both sword and Haki, combined with raw power, made him a reliable backbone for the crew. But Caesar and Esdeath were another story. Take Caesar first. No one could deny the fortress-like strength of his body. Blows that would fell ordinary fighters barely left him winded. Yet when it came to offense, he leaned almost entirely on his phantom beast techniques. Against opponents of equal or greater caliber, his other attacks simply bounced off. Physical strikes, swordplay, even Haki-infused blows lacked creativity and precision. He needed to expand his repertoire beyond summoning creatures. Then there was Esdeath. Her raw destructive power was awe-inspiring. A single lightning-fast sword slash could rip through steel and bone alike, but her skill set was wildly unbalanced. Her Devil Fruit ice abilities remained stuck at a basic level, and though her sight granted her a slight edge in Haki perception, she struggled to control her armament Haki effectively. Even her swordsmanship, which she practiced with unyielding dedication, showed gaps in technique and timing when pressed by true masters. Charles recalled the moment everything clicked. Standing toe-to-toe with the Roger pirates, he'd witnessed firsthand how Caesar's attacks fizzled and Esdeath's defenses cracked. Barrett had held steady, but he alone could not carry the burden of an entire crew. Dominance was everything in this world. The power to crush opposition, the finesse to outthink it, and the resilience to endure it. If the Rockefeller pirates were to remain feared on the Grand Line, Every pillar had to stand unshakable. Charles drew in a deep breath. There was no time for complacency. He would redesign the training regimen, sharpen skills, and shore up weaknesses. Caesar would learn new offensive techniques. Esdeath would refine her Haki control and elevate her devil fruit mastery. Barrett would push his already formidable talents to even greater heights. A new era of training was about to begin, an era defined by Charles's unwavering resolve to forge his officers into the world's most dominant fighters. Caesar and Esdeath had grown far too reliant on their devil fruit powers and swordsmanship, something Charles was determined to change. He strode toward them, his expression every bit the commanding father. Caesar's pulse quickened at the sight of him, while Esdeath straightened instinctively. "I'm going to take over your training from now on," Charles announced. "Your three-color domineering drills will be non-stop." Caesar and Esdeath exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what domineering meant: endless combat practice against toughest opponents. Fight someone weaker, and it was pointless. Only a real challenge would push them forward. A flicker of doubt crossed their minds. Had their father grown disappointed in them? Esdeath's jaw clenched. "Very well," she said coolly. "I'll devote myself to Haki training. I'll sheath my sword for the time being." Charles raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Haki practice doesn't mean abandoning your sword. Mastering both will make you stronger than ever." His gaze settled on the western blade at Esdeath's hip. "We train both at once." With that, Charles turned and beckoned them onward, ready to push his children into a new level of power. Charles drew the gleaming Holy Realm sanction from its scabbard, a grand western sword of the famed 21 Masterworks. Sunlight danced along its broad blade, casting a chill blue glow. "There's a special kind of blade called the Black Sword," he explained, eyes bright. "It's forged by suffusing the steel with armament Haki. No true swordsman, no matter how skilled, can call El himself great without one." At his signal, Xiaoluo's 7-star sword materialized in his right hand. Its deep green blade pulsed with subdued energy. "Behold my own black sword," Xiaoluo declared. "Though its hue is emerald, it's been steeped in domineering armament Haki for years. Only when your weapon absorbs your fighting spirit and darkens into a true black sword can you stake your claim as a real swordsman." Charles slipped the Holy Realm sanction back into its sheath. "A black sword?" he murmured, testing the name on his tongue. Esdeath, listening intently, blinked. "Armament Haki around the blade until the steel itself turns black?" "Exactly," Charles affirmed, meeting her gaze. "From this moment on, let your Haki flow through your sword at all times. Train until your blade itself becomes proof of your resolve." Esdeath's stern face broke into a determined nod. She would master this new path. She would forge her own black sword. "As the world's greatest swordsman, my father knows best." Charles glanced at Caesar, who was practically buzzing with excitement. "You too," he said. "Even though you're not a swordsman, you can still refine your Guandao into a black sword. It'll boost both its defense and its attack power." "Absolutely." Caesar sprang to his feet, nodding eagerly. "Let's get started. Today I'll train you in the art of overbearing presence. Barrett, come on. You still need to perfect your aura wrapping. Join us." Charles waved at Barrett, who had been hanging back, and led the two into the training hall. Around them, the others dispersed, some diving into their own drills, others wandering through the corridors. They'd already recovered the Thunder Fruit and absorbed the Ark's maxims. Now Charles's next task was to retrofit the Poseidon, integrating the Ark Proverbs power system to give it true flight capability. With that upgrade, he'd have a genuine flying warship, far beyond the crude Western contraptions the Golden Lion Society relied on. And his next destination? A place tied to Charles's dark past, the legendary Water City. Charles stepped onto the windswept shore of Kongdao Island, his boots sinking slightly in the coarse sand. This lonely stretch of coast carried a bitter memory. It was here, years ago, that he and the Red Earl had nearly been sold into slavery. The thought still made his blood run cold. How had they been so careless, falling into the hands of those slavers? Only he and the Red Earl knew the whole story, and the other traders who shared it had paid with their lives. Charles trusted his companion's discretion, and the Red Earl had given no sign of betrayal. They had spent a single night on Kongdao, and in the eerie half-light before dawn, the island felt almost sacred, an unspoken promise of conflict to come. But Charles paid little heed to that solemn air. His mind was already far away, charting a flight path over the vast blue. At his command, the 3 octopus-class airships undulated upward like giant sea creatures surfacing from the depths. Their 8 paddle-shaped propellers spun in perfect synchronicity, lifting the vessels skyward. Above them, the Red Earl's prize, the steel-hulled dreadnought named Leviathan, soared into view. Over 100 meters from prow to stern, it was a monstrous fortress of war. By midday, Leviathan glided onto the landing mat of the Imperial Navy's coastal base. 5 sleek destroyers and a pair of frigates formed a blockade across the harbor mouth. Sailors streamed onto their decks, rifles and cannons at the ready. From his vantage on Leviathan's bridge, Charles surveyed the fleet and felt nothing. He gave a slight nod. Instantly, 500 men trained their rifles on the destroyers. 4 broadside batteries charged their barrels. But Charles wanted something more decisive. "Unleash the blade wave," he ordered softly. A hush fell. Then, like a ripple in still water, 10 brilliant arcs of ethereal light leapt from the gunners' rifled muzzles. The waves of energy struck each destroyer at once. Hull plating melted like wax under a torch. Steel beams collapsed inward. The frigates fared no better. In a breathtaking display, every ship across the blockade shattered into twisted metal carcasses and fireballs. Below, the base's rear admiral stood on the docks, eyes blazing red with shock. He barely had time to shout, "What?" before the pirate armada, Leviathan and its escorting balloons, vanished into the horizon, leaving nothing but smoldering wrecks behind. Charles watched the smoke drift into a clear sky and felt only calm satisfaction. Kongdao Island had once been the site of his darkest hour. Now it marked the beginning of a war no one would soon forget. The alarm blared through the Grand Line naval fortress, just as young Rear Admiral Charles grabbed the comm unit. "Moses, this is the Grand Line Fortress. We're under attack by the Rockefeller pirates, and the casualties are staggering." At Navy headquarters, Admiral Moses turned pale. Before he could reply, Fleet Admiral Sora's voice crackled through. "Major General Flying Squirrel, stand down. We can't afford any more losses. Evacuate at once." Major General Flying Squirrel ground his teeth, glanced at the wounded and the fallen, then saluted. "Understood." He gathered the surviving troops and pulled them back inside the fortress walls. Charles barely noticed the retreat. He laid a blood-stained blueprint, the plans for the warship Ark Proverb, across a nearby table and beckoned Dr. Caesar Coulant. "How long before we can rebuild her?" Dr. Coulant adjusted his cracked goggles and studied the torn schematics. "With our shipwrights working non-stop and me pitching in despite not being a shipbuilder, it'll take at least 3 months to get her seaworthy again." Charles studied the map of steel beams and gun ports, determination hardening his gaze. 3 months. He had to make every one of them count. Caesar Courant leaned back in his chair, eyeing the schematic spread across the table. He'd never built a ship before, but he was convinced it wouldn't be difficult. After all, if Gaji could do it, so could he. Charles, ever the cautious one, frowned and tapped the drawing with his pen. "Why don't we bring in the master shipwrights from Water City?" he suggested. "Between our crew and their expertise, we've got the manpower and materials to finish in a week." Caesar studied the lines and gears sketched on the parchment. The design was deceptively simple, like a suspended gourd, its hull braced by a network of mechanical wings and buoyant chambers. He traced a finger along one of the support struts. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Whoever conceived this must understand both engineering and magic. If it works as intended, we'll have vessels that don't just sail the seas, but soar above them." Charles allowed himself a small smile. "Exactly. With Water City's builders on board, we can tackle the toughest step, installing the levitation rings and fine-tuning the flight controls. After that, it's just a matter of testing wind currents and adjusting ballast." Caesar nodded, excitement lighting his eyes. "Then let's not waste another moment. Send word to Water City at once. In 7 days, we'll make history, and the sky will be ours." Chapter 392. Tom. "All right. Once we reach the capital of 7 Waters, you'll take charge of building this ship," Charles commanded. "Understood," Caesar Courant replied, dipping into a respectful bow. As soon as Charles stepped out, Caesar studied the schematic in his hands. A spark of inspiration lit his eyes, and a smile tugged at his lips. Without hesitation, he strode into the laboratory to begin work. Half a month later, the Poseidon slipped into the harbor of Water City. Robert and his band of imps poured onto the deck, eyes wide with wonder. Look at that. This really is the capital of Seven Waters, the greatest shipyard in the world. Before them stretched a city floating on the sea, its sprawling docks and slipways connected by graceful wooden bridges. As the Poseidon eased alongside the quay, its emblem and the Rockefeller Pirates' black flag snapped fiercely in the salty breeze, sending a ripple of excitement and dread through the crowds. What? The Rockefeller Pirates have come back? And is that Rockefeller Charles himself? Murmurs swept across the waterfront. Many of the city's veterans went pale at the mention of Charles's name, haunted by memories of the disaster that had struck Seven Waters City 13 years ago. Everyone who set foot in the auction house of the capital of Seven Waters that day witnessed a scene they would never forget. The grand hall, once alive with bidding and chatter, had been reduced to carnage. The bodies of the auction staff lay intermixed with fallen princes, nobles, high-ranking officials, and wealthy merchants. Blood slicked the marble floors, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. It was that very slaughter that thrust Charles Rockefeller into infamy. Formerly the captain of the 8th Division of the Rock's Pirates, he now commanded his own crew as the captain of the Rockefeller Pirates. Renowned as one of the 4 legendary pirates of the New World, and whispered to be the world's greatest swordsman, Charles had advertised his arrival in Seven Waters City with ruthless efficiency. By nightfall, news of the massacre had spread to every corner of the city. Panic rippled through the crowded streets and alleyways as citizens fled their homes and shuttered their shops. No one felt safe anymore under the specter of the Rockefeller name. At a busy shipyard on the outskirts of the capital, a lone boatman came running toward a stout blacksmith's workshop. He burst through the open doors, clutching at his chest to steady his racing breath. "Master Tom, something's happened. An uninvited guest has arrived in Water City. Charles Rockefeller, captain of the Rockefeller Pirates, is here." Tom paused in mid-swing, hammer raised above the glowing anvil. He turned, his fanged grin sharpening as he took in the startled boatman. "Charles Rockefeller," he repeated, lowering the hammer with a metallic thunk. "The Rockefeller Pirates." His eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Looks like trouble's afloat." The docks of Water City had never been more alive. Word of the Roger pirates' arrival had spread like wildfire, and crews from every corner of the 7 seas had come to see them. As our small ferry nosed into the harbor channel, Tom, my ever-eager companion, could barely contain himself. "The Roger pirates! This place is buzzing, but that's not all. I need to meet Rockefeller Charles. Where is he hiding?" Tom practically bounced on his toes as he addressed the boatman steering us in. The old sailor's weathered face drained of color. "Master Tom, Rockefeller Charles isn't like the Roger pirates. 13 years ago, before you set foot in Water City, he razed the Seven Waters capital, killing thousands. He's not someone you approach lightly." Tom gave him a dismissive wave. "I've heard the stories, yes, but I have to see him for myself. Admiral Shen Kun of Fishman Island raves about him. Come on." Pushing past the boatman's protests, Tom led the way off the ferry and straight toward the main pier. Gone was the bustle of traders and sightseers. Everyone here was holding their pay, wreath. In the distance, rows of ships bore pirate flags, their crews giving the largest vessel plenty of room. Tom slowed, transfixed. The flagship's hull towered above the others, its figurehead carved into a roaring sea beast. On the mast flew a banner, 2 crossed tridents beneath a skull. "There," Tom whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "That's the Poseidon. That's Rockefeller Charles's ship. If only you could have seen him in his prime." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. The Poseidon glided into its berth as if it owned the dock itself. Tom took a step forward, lifted his hand and called out, "Hey, Rockefeller Charles, show yourself!" A hush fell over the empty pier as the great ship's gangplank began to lower. Chapter excerpt. "There really are fishmen." A child's voice drifted up from below the deck. Tom leaned over the railing and spotted a blond boy perched on the gunwale, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Around the boy danced several tiny, ghost-like water sprites, their pale bodies flickering like moonlight on the waves. At the sight, Tom's stern features softened into a genuine smile. "In that case, does Mr. Rockefeller, Charles, happen to be aboard?" An old friend asked me to pass along his greetings. Tom's voice was clear and warm. At once, Charles, who had been strolling the deck, hurried over. He knelt at the rail and peered down at the yellow-skinned figure below. It was Tom, the fishman engineer destined to build the famous water train years from now. Charles blinked twice. "Which friend?" Tom clasped his hands over his chest, his expression growing solemn. "General Shikun of Fishman Island," he said softly. "He wanted to see you one last time before he died." Charles felt his heart lurch. Of course, General Shikun, the very fishman who had barred his path on Fishman Island 13 years ago. His voice came out hoarse. "How did he die?" Tom closed his eyes and held himself still for a long moment. "He fell defending Fishman Island," he said quietly. "He gave his life fighting off human traffickers who tried to enslave our people." A hush fell as Charles stared at Tom, the memory of that long-ago confrontation coursing through him. The laughter of the water sprites drifted on the breeze, innocent and oblivious to the sorrow below. The person Charles admired most was Mr. Rockefeller, the blue fishman who roamed the seas fighting slave traders and liberating captives. Tom's voice wavered as he spoke those words, and Charles fell silent, recalling the evening they'd shared a drink with Rockefeller, never imagining their next parting could be permanent. It wasn't crushing grief, just a quiet ache. Stepping onto the jetty, Charles turned to his crew. Before them lay the shimmering expanse of the water city, its canals and gleaming spires bathed in afternoon light. "Everyone," Charles called out, "will be docked here for a few days while we overhaul the ship. Feel free to enjoy the city until we're ready to sail again." A cheer rose from the sailors and maids, some well-earned time off at last. At Charles's side, Tom hesitated, then asked, "Captain, are you planning any modifications to the ship?" Charles nodded, eyes on the massive steel warship, so different from their old wooden vessel. Tom's face lit up. "I'm a shipwright, sir. Let me handle the refit myself, on the house." Charles offered a firm, grateful smile. "Thank you, Tom, but I intend to oversee this renovation personally. I'll call on you if I need assistance." Tom bowed briskly. "As you wish, Captain." With that, the crew dispersed into the bustling streets of the water city, eager to explore, while Charles stayed behind to begin work on his ship. Charles's hesitation was plain to see, but Tom pressed on earnestly. "Don't worry, Mr. Charles. Tom's shipyard is the finest in the Seven Waters capital. We even built vessels for the Roger pirates." Tom immediately froze, hands snapping to his mouth. He hadn't meant to drop that name. But Charles's eyes lit up at the mention of Roger. He remembered the pirate Keeling, Nong's ship, its sleek hull and hidden compartments, just from last month's sighting. "If you're up for this," Charles said, sliding a sheaf of drawings across the table, "then I'd be glad to let you handle the construction." Tom's brow furrowed as he studied the sketches. They were intricate, far more complex than the usual pirate schooner or carrack. Among the cross-sections and hull reinforcements lay something entirely new, a compact power unit of impeccable design. Tom's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't magic or alchemy. It was pure mechanical engineering, a cutting-edge engine whose like he'd never seen. He leaned closer, tracing the fine lines with his finger. This is a power device?" Tom asked, almost to himself. Charles nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Exactly. I need a ship that can harness it safely, and someone I trust to bring it to life." Tom swallowed. The challenge was enormous, but Tom's shipyard had built the Roger Pirates' renowned flagship. If anyone could do it, he could. He took a deep breath and met Charles's steady gaze. "All right, let's build something unforgettable." Charles, his young apprentice, was utterly fascinated by these mechanical devices. Chapter 393, The Spaceship. Tom frowned as he studied the fragment of blueprints Charles laid out before him. "Mr. Charles," he said at last, "I think I can handle this." Charles glanced first at Tom, then at Caesar Coulant, who stood silently beside them. After a moment's thought, he nodded. "All right, I'll leave the construction of this ship to the two of you. One condition, though, you mustn't share these drawings with anyone." "I understand," Tom said eagerly. A broad grin spread across his face. Ever since he'd begun his career as a shipbuilder, he'd dreamed of tackling a project of this scale. Just last month, he'd completed a weather-adaptive vessel for the Roger pirates, a feat in itself, but this assignment felt different. This time, he was building for an old friend who trusted and respected his work. It was, Tom decided, the most rewarding year of his life. He straightened, filled with excitement. "Count on us, Mr. Charles. We won't let you down." Charles offered a brief, satisfied nod and carefully pocketed the schematics. Across the shipyard, the towering hull of their latest creation would soon begin to take shape. A vessel unlike any traditional ship, the spaceship Hades, born from those very plans. And with Tom and Caesar at the helm of construction, Charles couldn't wait to see his vision come to life. Charles stared at the empty street in the Seven Waters capital, feeling a knot of frustration tighten in his chest. Just a few years ago, these lanes teemed with merchants hawking exotic spices, tinkling trinkets, and steaming street food. Now every stall lay abandoned, the only sound the whisper of wind through dusty signs. He nudged Elena, one of the girls from the Rockefeller Pirates. "Tell me the truth," he mumbled. "Am I really that frightening to the locals?" Elena bit her lip to keep from laughing, and her companions stifled giggles behind cupped hands. Charles groaned, shoulders sagging. He had always been proud of his bold face and fierce reputation, until now. With no other choice, he turned and followed the others back toward Tom's shipyard. Inside the cavernous dock, beams of afternoon light slanted through the high windows, illuminating workbenches strewn with rivets and hull plates. Tom, the yard's master shipwright, stood over a large drawing rolled out on a central table. Caesar Courant, the visiting naval inspector, held the other end of the plans. Tom's eyes flickered with disbelief as he traced a series of curved wings and swept-back sails sketched on the parchment. This is a flying ship?" he stammered. Caesar Courant gave a short, amused shrug. He'd come to verify that Tom's supply of oak, iron, and specialized rigging matched Pluto's legendary blueprints, and he'd found every material to exact specification. "Why is that so surprising?" he asked. "Pluto's designs were always 2 steps ahead of any vessel we've seen." Tom ran a hand through his hair. "I knew Pluto's blueprints were advanced, but I never dreamed they'd give us true flight." He tapped the drawing where slender mahogany wings joined the hull's flanks. "We'll need reinforced struts, high-tensile cables, a steam turret for lift, and a powerful enough engine to counter the ocean currents." Caesar nodded confidently. "You have everything you need right here. Begin cutting the frames. Once we test the lift system, the Rockefeller fleet will command both sea and sky." As Tom and his crew gathered tools and materials, Charles slipped back into the yard. He caught Tom's eye and offered a small, hopeful grin. If this flying warship truly took shape, perhaps the Seven Waters capital would soon reconsider how it treated the boy named Charles and his daring pirate comrades. Above them, sunlight danced across the empty docks, as if heralding the dawn of a new kind of ship and a bolder future for all who sailed under its wings. Charles Courant stepped into the clearing, where freshly hewn timbers lay piled beside massive slabs of dragon bone. He ran a hand over one of the pale logs. "You actually got Ada, wood from the Tree of Legend." Caesar Courant, no relation, but a master shipwright in the capital of the Seven Waters, smiled with quiet pride. "This city is the world's top shipbuilding center. Adam's treasure trees are rare elsewhere, but here they turn up often enough." Charles's eyes, however, were fixed on the blueprint spread across a makeshift table, the plans for the Ark Proverb. Unlike the Hades-class designs from Pluto Engineering, which focused on firepower and speed, the Ark was built to fly. All it needed was a steady supply of electricity to lift into the sky, a dream that had driven every innovator to madness or glory. "All right, men," Caesar said, rolling up the plans. "The captain has given us just 1 week. Time is tight. Charles, have your foremen gather every item on this list by dawn. Tomorrow morning, we begin construction." Charles tucked the sheet into his coat pocket and nodded. Above them, the sun dipped low, but he could already imagine the Ark Proverb soaring into the clouds. This was his chance to make history. Tom examined the parts in his hands and nodded. "These aren't expensive. I'll have them ready in no time." Caesar Courant inclined his head in approval, and Tom's shipyard burst into action. Meanwhile, Charles sat on the beach, poring over the newspaper Morgan had brought him. He'd been stranded on this deserted island for over a month and knew little of the world's current affairs at sea. The ragged pages at least sketched out the recent events, especially a surge in naval activity over the past few days. The headline screamed, "Roger Pirates Break Naval Blockade. Again!" Charles fought back a smile. The Navy had never managed to contain the Roger pirates. Now, emboldened by their own efforts, they even dared to blockade the Chambo Islands. Was he next on their list? He needed to be prepared for anything. Time inched forward. Exactly 1 week later, Charles's new ship, the Poseidon, lay ready at the makeshift dock. Its steel hull stretched nearly insert-length meters, and retractable wings fanned out on either side. Inside, the bridge gleamed with upgraded navigational consoles and reinforced controls. Stepping aboard, Charles felt a thrill of anticipation. Just then, Tom appeared beside him, wiping grease from his hands. "Caesar Courant is waiting for you in the wheelhouse," he said with a grin. "He wants to set sail as soon as you arrive." Charles squared his shoulders. The open sea, and whatever challenges lay beyond, awaited. Charles stood before the Poseidon, a triumphant grin lighting up his face. "I promise you, this ship is unique. There isn't another like it in the world. We'll make her famous everywhere." Tom, who had been supervising the week's final tweaks, broke into a delighted dance. "Really? That would be incredible." Charles glanced back at his companions, Robert, Deidara, and the rest, all of whom had perked up at his enthusiasm. Then he turned to his father. "Dad, someday I'm going to build a flying ship of my own." The very idea electrified the crew. Deidara clapped Charles on the shoulder, and Robert laughed. "Well, we'll be watching your progress with great interest." Charles's eyes sparkled. He'd recently acquired the stolen blueprints for the Hades from Tom, hardly an honorable method, but temptation was too great to resist. Rumor had it that a mighty Pluto-class battleship had been stowed away in Wano, only to be obliterated by a volcanic eruption. If a single piece still survived, Charles meant to find it on this voyage. "All right, everyone, let's set sail," Tom called. At the harbor of the capital of Seven Waters, he stood on the dock and waved until the Rockefeller Pirates' flag slipped over the rail. The Poseidon glided out of the bay and into the endless expanse of ocean. From the cabin, Charles's voice rang out, "Engage flight mode." "At once, Captain," the helmsman replied, fingers flying over the controls. With a soft roar, the Poseidon lifted, leaving the sea and all its possibilities below. Chapter 7, Maiden Flight. Massive wings folded against the ship's hull suddenly extended outward, their iron ribs creaking as steel plates snapped into place. Nikola Tesla stepped forward to the crystal control orb at the center of the deck. With a measured breath, he pressed his palm against its surface and announced, 100,000 volts. Electric arcs leapt from Tesla's fingertips into the orb. In an instant, the ship's generators roared to life. Indicator lights blinked on, hums of power filled the engine bays, and every console sprang into action. Commander Caesar Courant stood at the main monitoring station, his sharp eyes tracking each surge of energy as it fed through the vessel's systems. A low, urgent rumble began beneath their feet. The deck tilted gently as the hull parted from the waterline. Crew members leaned over the railings, gripping the iron balusters, hearts pounding as the sea dropped away beneath them. "Climb! Keep climbing!" someone shouted, though no one could say who. The order galvanized the crew, and all eyes followed the ship's graceful ascent. Charles felt a surge of triumph well up in his chest. He spread his arms wide, as if he too were part of the mechanism lifting them skyward. "It's working," he cried. From Tesla came a peal of delighted laughter. He had poured months of research and late nights into this moment, and now his airship was no longer theory, it was soaring above the clouds. They did not pause until they reached an altitude of 5,000 meters. Then, with a thunderous roar, the twin-tail cannons of the propulsion array ignited, hurling the ship forward at speeds twice that of its fastest sea voyage. Charles's grin grew wider. Beyond the horizon, he could already make out the dark shapes of an enemy air fleet advancing. He had a plan to meet them, but one critical problem still hung over him. They needed a steady, ample power supply if they hoped to stay aloft long enough to win the coming battle. "I'd be happy to polish this for you, but to capture every plot point and detail, I'll need the full chapter text. Could you please paste the entire translated passage you'd like rewritten? Once I have it, I'll smooth out the language, ensure Charles is correctly presented as a boy, and deliver a cohesive, natural-sounding chapter. Chapter 394, The Navy's Encirclement. The conference room at Navy headquarters was unusually tense as the fleet admiral took his seat at the head of the table. The room fell silent, all eyes trained on him. The latest report, the fleet admiral announced, confirms that the Rockefeller pirates have left the capital of the Four Seas and are en route to the Chambord Islands. From there, they intend to make their way into the New World. I want your assessments and your orders. Several high-ranking officers exchanged looks, eager to speak. The fleet admiral allowed himself a small, approving smile. Over the past years, a fresh wave of talent had emerged within the Navy, and these young commanders would shape its future. Behind Vice Admiral Garp and Inspector Crane sat three of the service's most promising stars. Each had already distinguished himself through mastery of a powerful devil fruit ability. Admiral Sakazuki, known by all as Akainu, Admiral Borsalino, better known as Kizaru, Admiral Kuzan, the one and only Aokiji. These three admirals represented the very backbone of the next-generation Navy, unyielding, formidable, and ready for action. Marshal, one of the admirals spoke up, voice firm. The Rockefeller pirates must be stopped before they slip into the New World. We should dispatch every available fleet to the Chambord Islands and seize Charles's crew there. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. The time for hesitation had passed. With the direction set, the Navy's encirclement of the Chambord Islands and the capture of the Rockefeller pirates was about to begin. Charles perched on the edge of his chair in the briefing room, heart pounding as the top brass of the Navy assembled before him. Admiral Sakazuki, better known as Akainu, rose from his seat and struck the polished table with a clenched fist. We owe it to ourselves, and to the honor of the Navy, to make up for our failure against the Roger pirates, he declared, voice like rolling thunder. Around him, several younger admirals and vice admirals straightened at attention, but a few of the old guard frowned in disapproval, exchanging uneasy glances. After all, the victory over Roger's crew had been the result of decades of careful planning by these very veterans. Fleet Admiral Garp and the Warlord of the Sea, both silent, studied their palms, unwilling to add fuel to the rising tension. Standing to one side, the youngest of the Marine generals, his cheeks still flushed with zeal, flashed Sakazuki an eager grin. From there, a chorus of younger officers voiced their support, a swift, crushing campaign against the new threat, the Rockefeller pirates. Admiral Kuzan, Aokiji, leaned back in his chair, then met his colleague's fierce gaze. Akainu, he began calmly, I understand your anger, but rushing headlong into another siege is exactly what got us in trouble before. Recall Kazuki Oden's sudden counterattack. None of us saw it coming, and it nearly shattered our fleet. This time, we need contingencies. Detailed reconnaissance, supply lines secured. We must prepare for every eventuality. We'll prepare, Sakazuki snapped, but even he couldn't mask the hint of grudging respect in his voice. Charles exhaled. The tension in the room was palpable, but thanks to Aokiji's timely reminder, the Navy's next campaign would be far better planned and far deadlier for anyone who stood in their way. How long will it take us to be fully ready? Sora's voice cut through the room. Once the Rockefeller pirates make it into the New World, they'll have the initiative, and the bloodshed will be far worse. We have to act now, before they can even think about waging war. Nip them in the bud. Admiral Aokiji frowned. Nip them in the bud? You sound like you're talking about weeds, not a pirate crew. Do you have any idea how powerful the Rockefeller pirates are? Our latest intelligence on them is ancient. At once, Admiral Ching Pheasant bristled. Coward! If the Navy took orders from you, we'd never stand a chance against any pirate, Rockefeller or other. Wise. Akainu's eyes blazed in response. Reckless. That's what you are, Ching Pheasant. If the Navy followed your harebrained schemes, we'd have collapsed long ago. Their shouts rose in a furious clash, until, with a thunderous bang, Sora slammed his fist on the table. Chairs rattled, papers flew. Enough, he roared. What have you done to my office? Silence fell instantly. Every gaze turned to Aokiji and Ching Pheasant, who both straightened beneath Sora's furious stare. The warlord's aide interposed hastily. Admiral, please, calm down. Akainu and Aokiji are just as anxious and confused as you are. Fleet Admiral Sora exhaled at Sengoku's intervention. The edge of his anger softened, but I could still feel a spark of frustration under the surface. Vice Admiral Crane, standing off to one side, stole worried glances at Akainu, Aokiji, and the other senior officers arrayed behind them. This wasn't just an argument, it was an ideological clash that threatened to split the Navy in two. In a few years, barring any upheaval, Akainu, Kizaru, and Aokiji would rise to admiral. Their schism alone could fracture Marine unity permanently. Crane, Sora said, turning to the anxious staff officer, explain our next strategic move against the Rockefeller pirates. Crane hesitated, then squared his shoulders and addressed the assembled officers. The New World is crawling with powerful crews. Now that Charles Rockefeller has thrown his hat into the ring, things will only get more volatile. We could see pirates turning on one another in a bloody scramble for territories, or, conversely, the various factions might band together in a desperate bid to break beyond the New World's boundaries. He paused, meeting Sora's gaze. But one fact remains constant. Pirates harbor deep-seated hatred for each other. Any alliance they form is bound to be fragile. Power struggles and revenge killings are inevitable. Admiral Sengoku set down his porcelain teacup and surveyed the room. Around him sat Vice Admiral Garp, Fleet Admiral Sora, and Commander Zephyr, all awaiting his assessment. He poured himself another cup of tea, letting the steam curl upward before he spoke. Gentlemen, he began, voice calm but firm, the New World is on the brink of open war. First, we have the long-standing rivalry between Whitebeard's crew and the Golden Lion pirates. Then there's the East versus West clash brewing between Charles Ling and the Rockefeller pirates. Either of these sparks could ignite a full-scale conflict. He paused, glancing meaningfully at Fleet Admiral Sora. And that's not all. Lone privateer Patrick Redfield has staked his claim in the outer ring. The red-haired pirates have appeared as well, though they seem uninterested in territorial gains. And we cannot forget the Roger pirates. Our orders are clear. Capture them wherever they surface. Sora leaned forward. Admiral, if we're to apprehend the Rockefeller pirates, we must strike before they push deeper into the New World. Once they secure their foothold, our window of opportunity will vanish. Sengoku nodded. Precisely. The world government's mandate to seize the Roger pirates remains, but right now the Rockefeller threat is our priority. We cannot afford to let them slip away. Vice Admiral Garp cracked a grin. Sounds like a chance for some old-fashioned Navy thunder, eh? Commander Zephyr offered a curt salute. I'm ready whenever you give the word. Sora stood, energy radiating from him. Then let's move. Vice Admiral Garp, Commander Zephyr, you'll lead the 1st Fleet Detachment. I'll coordinate support from the 2nd and 3rd Divisions. Sengoku, Admiral's privilege, let me know whenever you want us to press the attack. Sengoku raised his teacup in salute. Very well, dismissed. With that, the 3 officers departed to marshal their forces. Outside the conference room's heavy doors, the world waited. Pirates and Marines poised on the verge of collision, and somewhere on the horizon, the Rockefeller pirates sailed on, unaware that the Navy's sharpest edge was being honed for us. Chapter X, the Navy's counterstrike. This is our only chance. Admiral Kong's voice rang out across the war room. Sir, yes, sir. The senior naval officers snapped to attention. Within moments, Navy headquarters had finalized its plans against the Rockefeller pirates. More than a dozen warships slipped out of port in rapid succession, a show of force that drew every fleet's gaze. Not long ago, the Navy had been wholly focused on encircling the Roger pirates. Now, their target had shifted, and when news spread that it was the Rockefeller pirates, every commander understood what was coming. The Rockefellers might not be as feared as the Rogers, but could they stand up to a full naval assault? After all, the Roger pirates still held the crown as the world's most powerful crew, their strength eclipsing that of the other 4 major pirate bands combined. Aboard the Roger pirates' flagship, Riley watched his captain with worry etched across his face. Roger, are you certain you want us to sneak into Charles Lingling's kingdom and seize the Traveler's Road Sign Chronicles? Roger's eyes were steady, his jaw set. Despite commanding a force capable of challenging even the Big Mom pirates, he insisted on this covert mission. Before Riley could press him further, Roger stepped forward, his voice low but unwavering. Rayleigh, prepare the infiltration team. We sail at dawn. It looks like you've only provided a brief excerpt. Could you please share the full chapter text you'd like me to polish? Once I have the entire passage, including any scenes with Charles, formerly Charlotte, I can revise it into a smooth, idiomatic English version for you. Chapter 395, Navy vs. Rockefeller Pirates. Roger didn't know who leaked the intel, but the moment he heard that Charles Lingling held a red poneglyph tablet, he resolved to take it by any means necessary. That fragment of history could rewrite everything he thought he knew. Yet Roger's own body betrayed him. An insidious virus had nearly consumed his strength. Each skirmish left him weaker than before, and he could no longer afford a head-to-head clash with that relentless Charles Lingling on Cake Island. Stealth was his only weapon now. "Let's just hope Charles Lingling doesn't catch on to us," Rayleigh murmured, his breath visible in the cold night air as their small cutter slipped silently through the bay. Roger offered a wry smile. "Don't worry. Once we have a copy of the poneglyph, we'll rendezvous with Kozuki Oden and the others. By the time Kozuki's team reaches Zou, they'll have the original tablet in hand." He deliberately excluded the bulk of the Roger pirates from this mission. Upon entering the New World, the crew had split into two covert detachments. Roger and Rayleigh led one group into the 10,000 Kingdoms, shadowed by only their most trusted lieutenants. Meanwhile, Jabra and Kozuki Oden pressed on toward Zou, determined to make accurate rubbings of the ancient inscription. Tonight, everything hinged on speed and secrecy. If they succeeded, the balance of power in the sea would shift, and the Marines, under Rockefeller's orders, wouldn't know what hit them. Kozuki Oden had studied the Wano poneglyphs since childhood. As heir to the Kozuki clan, he knew those inscriptions by heart, and he certainly didn't need to sail all the way back to Wano just to make rubbings. Yet in all his years of careful planning, he never could have predicted what happened next. "Roger, how dare you steal my treasures? You'll pay for this." A furious roar cut across Cake Island, so sharp that everyone within earshot froze in their tracks. "Is that Dad? What's going on? Have invaders broken in?" One by one, the Lingling children spilled out from their rooms and craned their necks toward the shifting skies above the island's center. They knew that sight all too well, a sign that their father had just unleashed one of his fearsome powers. Aboard the Sunny, Roger still held the ancient bladed knife he'd used to slice off a portion of the poneglyph's text. He brandished it before Silver's Rayleigh and laughed at the storm clouds gathering overhead. "Ahem," came a sharp, amused voice over the roar of wind and thunder. "Charles Lingling, you really ought to share. I only made a copy. I didn't take the original. Now, if you'll excuse us." Before the words had even left Roger's lips, a blinding surge of energy erupted from Napoleon, Charles's living hat. Rayleigh and Roger exchanged one quick glance, and then bolted, fleeing down the ribboned paths that wound between the towering cake spires. For a single suspended heartbeat, Charles stood stunned, his fury wrenched away by the sheer force of his own weapon rebounding on its wielder. Then realization swept over him like a tidal wave. "Roger!" His shout rolled across the riotous tempest, and at that very moment a thunderclap answered from the skies, an omen that this confrontation was only just beginning. The morning clouds parted as Roger vaulted aboard the waiting ship. In a heartbeat, they weighed anchor and slipped silently out of the harbor. "Wow!" Roger gasped, then suddenly coughed, a spray of blood staining his palm. "Roger, are you all right?" Rayleigh dropped the tiller and rushed to his side. "I'm fine," Roger panted, pressing a hand to his mouth. "Take the helm. Let's get out of here before Charles Lingling catches up." Rayleigh thrust a small vial into Roger's hand. "Here, medicine the Kurokus left. Take it slow." Roger upended 2 pills and swallowed them dry. Within moments his color began to return, his breathing steadied, though his wrists still trembled. He managed a bitter grin. "Nothing like a reminder you're alive." He stood in squaw, read his shoulders, drawing confidence from the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. Rayleigh, watching him, felt a rush of nostalgia. He saw in Roger that same indomitable spirit he'd known in his own youth. He pressed a hand to the wheel and bent forward, refusing to break the captain's hard-won resolve with words. Out on the Grand Line, the Chambord Islands lay shrouded in early mist. Below the naval fortress at sea level, a dozen warships formed a rough semicircle, ready to spring upon any vessel that tried to slip away. Two flagships held the center of the blockade, one with a fierce, dog-headed figurehead, the other plain but massive, its decks bristling with cannon. Above them all, the dawn sky brightened, and Roger's ship cut its wake toward freedom. The two ships flying the Navy's flag felt alive the moment Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp and Fleet Admiral Sengoku appeared on deck. Their return boosted every sailor's morale tenfold. "Those celestial dragons are still tying our hands," Garp complained nonchalantly, biting into a powdered donut. At his words, Admiral Warring States, standing nearby, exchanged a worried look with the other officers before exhaling in relief. All across the two decks, the sailors drew in a collective breath. Finally, their commanders had arrived to set things right. "Garp," Sengoku snapped, narrowing his eyes, "this isn't exactly something we can just brush off." Garp chuckled, scratched the back of his head, and offered Sengoku an apologetic grin. The surrounding admirals and captains all bore dark lines of exasperation on their faces. "Still," Garp pressed on, "have you heard any word on the Rockefeller pirates? If everything goes to plan, we might settle this today." Warring States leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Speaking of which, I've never actually matched my strength against Charles Rockefeller. I wonder, whose power is greater, my iron fist or his blade?" Garp's eyes lit up as he clenched his fists in excitement. Sengoku merely rolled his eyes. Around them, Admiral Zephyr stood ready but silent. Admiral Sora remained entangled in the Celestial Dragon's red tape, and Admiral Crane was back at headquarters, overseeing the fleet's operations. The stage was set. Today, two legendary forces would finally collide. Only two supreme fighters remained poised for battle, Charles and Admiral Garp. Among the other high command officers, only Admirals Akainu and Aokiji could hold their own. Behind them stood three battle-hardened vice admirals, four newly promoted vice admirals, and a swarm of rear admirals. Rumors rippled through the fleet. Could they really capture the Rockefeller pirates? Was Charles Rockefeller himself finally within the Navy's grasp? The sea beyond the harbor lay unnaturally still. News had just arrived that the Navy intended to surround the Rockefeller pirates. Everyone could sense that war was about to erupt. No one on the Shampoo Islands dared to venture outdoors. Auction houses, amusement parks, inns, every public venue had closed their doors. Even the Celestial Dragons, with all their arrogant fanfare, refrained from celebrating in the streets. Fear hung in the air like a storm cloud. On the boardwalk of No. 13 Island, a lone woman sat in a rattan chair, long legs crossed, a slim cigarette poised between her fingers. She stared at the warships anchored just offshore, her eyes distant, as if reliving some memory only she could see. The cries of seagulls drifted overhead. Time itself felt suspended. All around her, restless crowds whispered in hushed tones, "What's really going on?" Chapter 7. The Shadow of Poseidon. A heavy tension settled over HMS Vigilance, the Navy frigate patrolling these open waters. Sweat beaded on the sailors' brows as they scanned the horizon. Then, whoo! The warning bell thundered through the decks. Every sailor snapped to attention, eyes straining toward the distant swell. "General, sighted through the glass!" cried the lookout. He raised his spyglass with shaking hands. "One pirate ship. She's the Poseidon, flagship, IP of the Rockefeller pirates." The name alone sent a chill down every spine. The Admiralty had long tracked the Rockefeller crew. Their intelligence files brimmed with warnings. Still, few captains ever faced them, and fewer lived to tell the tale. Now here they came, cutting through the waves with deliberate grace. Back aboard the Poseidon, Charles stepped onto the main deck alongside his comrades Barrett, Esdeath, and Caesar. The pirate crew tumbled up from below, weapons in hand, eyes shining with anticipation. Deck officers barked orders that rang out above the creak of rigging and the slap of water against the hull. "Battle stations now!" shouted Barrett, securing the broadside cannons. Esdeath unsheathed her blade, its steel glinting under the rising sun. Caesar cracked his knuckles and let out a low laugh. "At last, the taste of long-awaited blood," he muttered, staring at the Navy ships arrayed before them. From across the water, the Navy fleet watched the Poseidon advance. Flags fluttered, guns were loaded, and every man braced for the storm about to break. In that charged silence, both sides knew only one thing. By day's end, one fleet would claim victory, and the other would sink beneath the waves. Chapter 396, Navy versus the Rockefeller Pirates. A shrill cry split the dawn air. Ship sighted! Instantly the Navy's alarm bells thundered. Admiral Warring States bellowed, "All hands to battle stations." Sailors scrambled across the deck, priming cannons, manning gun ports, and training their barrels on the dark silhouette looming ahead. A cold knot formed in Warring States' stomach. "They've appeared so brazenly." "Sir, through the spyglass," the lookout called urgently. "It's Douglas Barrett, Esdeath Rockefeller, and Caesar Rockefeller." On the pirate ship's deck, Barrett and Esdeath stood like statues, icy stares fixed on the Navy fleet. Caesar Rockefeller paced eagerly, barely containing his impatience. The lookout squinted again. "Admiral, there's no sign of the world-renowned swordsman Charles Rockefeller." Warring States ground his teeth. "Search the entire vessel, no corner unturned. Find Charles Rockefeller at once." Meanwhile, on the Rockefeller flagship, Commander Robert leaned casually against the railing, watching the approaching warships with a self-satisfied grin. "Looks like the Navy's rolling out the red carpet to welcome us back to the new world." Barrett's laugh echoed across the deck. "Perfect. Then we'll give them a greeting they'll never forget." Beside them, Deidara balled his fists, eyes shining with fierce anticipation. The sheer confidence radiating from the Rockefeller pirates sent a shiver through every sailor on the Navy ships. The long-awaited clash for control of these waters was about to begin. "Sir, the Rockefeller pirates are approaching." On the deck of the Marines' flagship Poseidon, alarm bells rang as lookouts trained their telescopes on the distant horizon. Only one ship cut its way through the early morning mist, and yet every sailor stood frozen in apprehension. "Why the panic?" Admiral Sengoku barked, sweeping a disdainful glance over the tense crew. "It's just a single pirate ship." His booming voice snapped the men to attention, but not even his authority could banish their unease when the vessel drew nearer. "Vice Captain Douglas Barrett, nicknamed the Devil's Heir," the lookout reported, voice trembling. "Esdeath Rockefeller, eldest daughter of Charles Rockefeller, the Ice Queen of the Seas. Caesar Rockefeller, his eldest son, the Dragon, and every one of Charles Rockefeller's other children is on board." At that, footsteps thundered across the Poseidon's deck. The Marines braced themselves as the pirates themselves cleared a path on their vessel. From the gangway strode a tall figure in an immaculate naval coat, Charles Rockefeller. The morning sun glinted off his polished boots as he ascended to the bow. "Charles Rockefeller," the lookout gasped. Even the usually unflappable Admirals Garp and Sengoku exchanged somber nods. Charles paused at the rail and swept his coat open, revealing the Rockefeller family crest embroidered in silver. He laughed, a rich, echoing sound that carried across the water. "Ha! Have you come to welcome me, admirals?" he called, voice brimming with challenge. His laughter rolled like distant thunder, and the sea itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Charles planted his feet on the bow, the wind whipping around him. His voice carried clearly to every officer assembled on the deck. "Sengoku." Sengoku, one of the 5 elders, fixed his stern gaze on the boy. You're seeing me off?" Unfazed, Charles let a faint smile play across his lips. At once, the 7-star sword materialized in his hand, its blade shimmering with emerald light. Sengoku's eyes narrowed at the sudden display of power. Charles raised his right arm in a smooth, confident motion. "Forward." He shouted the word as if issuing a challenge. Instantly, a torrent of brilliant green sword energy exploded from the blade. It coalesced into a blade of pure force and shot across the open water toward the entire naval fleet. Admiral Green Pheasant, who had never before witnessed Charles in action, leaned forward, eyes wide. Could he truly be the world's finest swordsman? Akainu cast a brief, disapproving glance at Admiral Aokiji before turning his attention back to the oncoming attack. He said nothing. On the deck, Vice Admiral Garp munched thoughtfully on a donut, watching the luminous wave of power speeding toward them. As the aura grew brighter, he tossed the half-eaten pastry aside. His muscles bulged grotesquely beneath his coat. "You want to show me your strength, boy? Fine." In a heartbeat, Garp lunged off the ship. His movement was so swift that most onlookers lost track of him entirely. He thrust his fist inward, armored aura crackling around him. "Fistbone meteor!" he roared. Even as the green blade of energy bore down like a meteor, a tiny figure, Charles himself stood firm in its path. He wrapped his left fist in his own crackling aura and let it collide head-on with Garp's mighty blow. A blinding shockwave ripped through the air as sword energy met punch, sending ripples across the sea. 3 seconds after sword energy and a crushing fist met, the shimmering blade wave evaporated into the air, only to tear the sea apart with its aftershock. A towering wall of water reared over the decks. "Grab the railings!" sailors from every warship shouted, white-knuckling the guardrails as the swell threatened to sweep them away. "Aokiji! Blue pheasant!" someone roared. At the call, the vice admiral stood, his dark eyes scanning the turbulent waters around the fleet. "Ice Age," Kuzan intoned, exhaling a breath of pure cold. From bow to stern, the salt water instantly crystallized, transforming the warship's surrounding expanse into a solid frosty plain. Charles stared in stunned silence as the ocean froze, the waves locking in place beneath his feet. "Are you planning to turn these ships into your personal fortresses?" he demanded, unable to hide his awe. Esdeath, watching from the quarterdeck, narrowed her eyes. This icy power rivaled her own. So this was Aokiji, one of the Navy's 3 monster vice-admirals, the Logia user of the ice fruit. Already she felt the chill of competition burning hotter than any flame. She clenched her Western-style sword more tightly. It would be entertaining, she thought, to see whose devil fruit would prove superior. "Ha! Nicely done, Blue Pheasant," Admiral Garp boomed, striding out onto the frozen deck. He pumped a fist in the air, then gave Kuzan a hearty thumbs up. Ice and steel, winter and war, on this frozen sea the next clash was just beginning. Admiral Sengoku watched as the Rockefeller pirates hesitated. With a decisive gesture, he shrugged off his navy cloak and leapt from his ship's deck. "Rockefeller Charles, your voyage ends here." In an instant, Sengoku's body swelled into a towering golden Buddha. "Giant Buddha shockwave," he thundered. He gathered a sphere of radiant light in his palm. The orb detonated into a concussive blast that raced straight for Charles, who calmly stood at the bow. Charles merely smiled. Before the shockwave could strike him, a tall figure vaulted into its path and met it with a single, crushing punch. Blonde hair whipping in the blast, Barrett landed solidly between Charles and the attack. Sengoku's eyes narrowed. "You think you can challenge the fleet admiral so soon?" Barrett retracted his fist, a dark aura of power swelling around him. "If you're so confident, Admiral, let's see what you can do." Black energy crackled over Barrett's frame. Devil form! His body merged seamlessly with the surrounding ice, growing into a colossal 10-meter-tall giant that now towered over the deck. Charles Barrett advanced without hesitation toward Fleet Admiral Sengoku. "Charles Barrett?" Sengoku's voice boomed across the deck. Sengoku felt a chill slip down his spine. Not at the sight of Barrett himself, but at what this young man's presence meant for the Rockefeller pirates. Over the years, the Navy had tolerated growing bounties on the Rockefeller crew, for Shiloh Rockefeller's sake, but they'd paid little heed to this Barrett fellow. All they really knew of him was a recent clash with Captain Lai, a skirmish that had revealed almost nothing. At barely 20 years old, Barrett had seemed like just another hot-headed rookie. Now, faced with his sudden, earth-shaking display of power, Sengoku's confidence wavered. With a thunderous crash, Barrett's fist collided with Sengoku's palm. The shockwave split the air. Both blows hit with such equal force that even Vice Admiral Garp, standing close by, couldn't suppress a frown of astonishment. Sengoku's eyes narrowed. "Open fire," he roared. At his command, the warships of the Navy surged forward in unison, cannons thundering. "Pirate scum, prepare to die," came the battle cry as gun ports swung open, and a hail of cannonballs tore toward Barrett and the Rockefeller flag fluttering behind him. A thunderous wave of flame erupted into the sky. Sikorsky's fist, wreathed in molten magma, shot forward as he barreled into the ranks of the Rockefeller pirates. With brutal efficiency, he tore through them one by one, no quarter given, no survivors left in his wake. Chapter 397, Navy versus Rockefeller Pirates. A towering column of molten rock shot into the sky and crashed down onto the deck of the Navy battleship Poseidon. Chunks of scorching magma hissed and splattered across the steel plates, sending up plumes of steam. Standing amid the chaos, Caesar Rockefeller threw back his head and laughed, a long, triumphant roar that echoed off the ship's hull. His body convulsed, expanding as tough, Iridescent scales erupted along his arms and shoulders. Within moments he had taken on a fearsome half-dragon form. In his clawed grasp materialized his massive guandao, the blade's edge glinting malevolently beneath the flickering lava. With a thunderous cry, Caesar swung the guandao in a sweeping arc. The blade met the cascading magma in a titanic collision, molten rock and steel locking together as steam and embers billowed in every direction. For a heartbeat, neither force yielded. Then, with a sudden tearing sound, the magma peeled away from the onrushing flow and slumped against Caesar's blade. He tilted his head up, opened his monstrous jaw, and exhaled a blast of frigid air. The gale struck the lava with a crack like ice fracturing, instantly freezing it into jagged black rock that shattered into shards across the deck. Caesar landed nimbly on broken stone, grinning ferally. "Ha! Were you trying to light my birthday candles?" He taunted, ripping the shards aside with one casual sweep of his guandao. Opposite him, Vice Admiral Akainu Sakaski steeled himself. Known throughout the Navy for his unyielding devotion to absolute justice, Sakaski's arms glowed molten red. Rivulets of superheated magma dripped from his sleeves, scorching the deck as he advanced. "Caesar Rockefeller," he snarled, "your trail of blood ends here." With that, Sakaski thrust both arms forward. Streams of liquid fire roared toward the half-dragon pirate, each orb of magma roaring like a volcanic blast. "Empty words!" Caesar shot back. He lunged, blade raised high, his laughter still echoing as he closed the gap. "Show me if you've got the strength to back them up, Admiral." Steel met molten fury in a deafening clash. Sparks and steam erupted around them, and the deck shuddered beneath the force of their battle. Sailors scattered to the rails, shouting orders and scrambling to keep their footing. But for Caesar and Akainu, nothing existed beyond the savage rhythm of blades and fire. In that furnace of combat, pirate and marine alike fought with everything they had, each determined to claim victory or die trying. Clang! Caesar swung his blade, shaking off the jagged rock that had lodged itself in the edge, then lunged at Sakaski with a vicious slash. The molten fist, empowered by devil fruit power, crashed into Caesar's sword, its surface glowing with dark armament Haki. Sakaski immediately felt the crushing weight of the impact drive down on his arm, his eyes narrowing at the sudden pressure. "Heh! Is that all you've got?" Caesar mocked, flashing a confident grin. "Your threats sound a lot tougher than your punches." Sakaski's face remained impassive as he hurled another blow. Caesar met it with a swift downward chop. Though he'd called it easy, in fact he'd activated both observation and armament Haki to anticipate and absorb the full force of Sakaski's rock-type devil fruit. Still, the strike rattled him backward, sending him stumbling several paces across the ash-scorched ground. A reddish glow crept up Sakaski's right arm as molten energy pulsed in his fist. "Magma fist!" he roared. In an instant, the searing, magma-charged blow shot forward, aiming straight for Caesar's head. Caesar barely brought his sword up in time. The two powers collided in a flash of sparks, but the sheer momentum shoved him backward once more. He skidded to a stop, wiping dust and embers from his uniform, then let out a low, impressed chuckle. "Not bad," he admitted, breathing hard. "You really are someone you can't underestimate." Caesar's grin faded, his eyes sharpening as he braced himself for Sakaski's next move. The battlefield had reached a deadlock. Charles swung his massive knife at Sakaski, sparks flying as steel met steel, but neither side could gain the upper hand. Around them, veteran fighters battled in equal measure, and there was no sign of the tide turning. Admiral Garp wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes flicking first to Sengoku, then to Sakaski, and finally settling on Kuzan, who stood off to the side with arms folded. Kuzan caught Garp's gaze and cracked a grin. Dropping lightly to the deck below Charles, Kuzan called up to him. "So, who's my opponent this time?" Charles, still clutching his blade, turned to look. Recognition flashed across his face. Kuzan was one of the Navy's most powerful officers. "Me," Kuzan announced with a flourish. Before Charles could respond, there was a whisper of movement behind him. Esdeath sprang from the shadows, her form so swift it left an afterimage in the air. She landed before Kuzan in a fluid motion, sword at the ready. Kuzan squinted at her, mock chagrined. "A lady pirate, huh? I don't strike women, but who invited you into this fight?" He stretched out both hands, frost blooming at his fingertips. "Ice spear formation." With a snap of his wrists, 3 razor-sharp spears of ice shot toward Esdeath like frozen javelins. He smirked. I toppled the last man who dared underestimate women. Now it's your turn. Unfazed, Esdeath gripped her sword and called out, Bing Lan! Her blade glowed with a pale, frigid light as she met the ice spears head-on. Steel rang against ice in a flash of sparks, heralding the start of another legendary confrontation. Charles's ice-charged slash effortlessly shattered the 3 jagged ice spikes and whipped toward Kuzan in an instant. A swordsman? So young, he must be the son of the world's greatest swordsman to swing a blade like that. Kuzan couldn't hide his surprise as he dove aside, refusing to take a direct hit. Charles sprang to his feet and lunged forward, his frost-forged sword singing through the air. In the same heartbeat, Kuzan summoned a dagger of pure ice in his hand. Not at all hiding, he shot back. Clang, the armament Haki-infused ice dagger clashed with Charles's blade. Sparks flew as steel sheared through ice, gouging a hole straight through Kuzan's weapon. You're strong, Kuzan admitted, brow furrowing. He straightened, voice low and determined. Frozen time capsule. A ripple of crystalline frost raced down Charles's sword and leapt outward, smothering the space between them in bitter cold. Yet Charles didn't freeze. He only grew colder, his blade wreathed in swirling frost. Even Kuzan, a natural Logia wielder of the ice fruit, felt a chill creep into his bones. Oh, right, Kuzan panted, stepping back and wiping sweat from his brow. You ate the superhuman cold fruit. Cold can't freeze you. Is that all you can do? Esdeath spun her sword in a wide arc, unleashing ripples of blade energy that radiated out in every direction. Swordsman, what a nuisance, she sneered as Kuzan braced himself. Ice cubes, pheasant beak. Kuzan thrust out his right arm, shaping frost into a gigantic ice bird. It tore through Esdeath's sword energies, freezing the very air in its wake. Before she could react, he darted forward, but Esdeath met him head-on, her blade shattering the ice creature into glittering shards. Kuzan dropped low and slipped behind her. Your journey ends here, little lady. Ice Age, he slammed both hands onto her shoulders. Frost bloomed instantly across Esdeath's skin, crackling and spreading like white wildfire. Damn you, Esdeath staggered, but her eyes blazed with defiance. With a roar, she gathered her strength. Lightning strike! A crack of thunder split the sky. Kuzan tensed to dodge. Too late. A jagged bolt streaked down and hit him squarely in the chest. He was hurled backward more than 10 meters, skidding across the ice before coming to rest in a smoking heap. He struggled to one elbow and looked up at the figure looming before him. All around, fighters paused, staring in stunned silence. The thunderous roar still echoed in the air. It really is a thunder fruit, power born of lightning, Esdeath whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and triumph as she lowered her sword, ready for the next move. The roar of thunder filled the air as lightning coalesced into a towering figure in the sky. Warring states stared wide-eyed. That can't be. The legendary Thunder Devil fruit, lost for centuries? His gaze sharpened. It's Charles Rockefeller, the second son of the Rockefellers, and his brother, Tesla Rockefeller. With a crack of thunder, Tesla descended onto the ice beside Esdeath. Sister, are you all right? He called, concern etched on his face. Esdeath brushed ice shards from her shoulder and shook her head, dismissing his worry. I'm fine. Tesla flexed his fingers. Sparks of electricity danced across his knuckles. 2 against 1, I won't say no. Across from them, Kuzan's expression remained unreadable as frosty tendrils crept up his arms, encasing his fists in ice. Bring it on, he said, voice calm. Esdeath stepped forward, her eyes cold and determined. This isn't a friendly spar. It's a fight to the death. Don't expect mercy. Tesla thrust out a hand and lightning erupted, forming a flock of crackling bird-shaped bolts overhead. Electric Chidori! At the same instant, Esdeath swung her blade in a graceful arc, a wave of azure sword energy soaring into the sky. Azure Orchid Slash! Their twin assaults, one crackling with electricity, the other gleaming with blue-white sword chi, rushed toward Kuzan, intent on smashing through his icy defenses. As soon as Kuzan spotted the 2 incoming assaults, he instantly erected a shield of ice. Chapter 398, Navy vs. Rockefeller Pirates, continued. Lightning crackled as Esdeath's blade slammed into Kuzan's ice shield. The impact neutralized the strike, but the electric charge still coursed through the barrier, numbing Kuzan's limbs. He staggered under the sudden shock, barely keeping the shield aloft. Then, a searing slash of pale blue light tore through the air. With a groan, Kuzan was flung backward, crashing against the deck. Snow and ice particles scattered in all directions. Gasping, he pushed himself upright, one hand pressed against a 3-inch gash across his chest. Frost clung to his coat, mingling with the dark stain of fresh blood. He spat a frothy crimson onto the deck and managed a hoarse laugh. "She's strong," he admitted, voice rough. From the tip of the marine cruiser's bow, Charles watched the exchange with a half-smile. His gaze flicked from Kuzan's battered form back to Admiral Garp. Garp's face was drawn and stern. Around them, the battle's momentum had shifted ominously. Sengoku struggled in a deadlocked duel with Barrett. Sakazuki fought tooth and nail against Charles's son, Caesar, and now Kuzan, once an unstoppable force, lay wounded after clashing with the Rockefeller pirates. Garp's jaw tightened as he surveyed his officers, each straining under the enemy's pressure. The Marines' combat strength was being contained, and in some cases, crushed. A tense silence fell over the deck, broken only by the distant roar of cannon fire. Admiral Garp let out a low growl. Retreat was unthinkable, but victory was looking more elusive by the second. Still, he squared his shoulders and met Charles's gaze. The Navy's backbone might be bent, but it would not break. Not today. Other navies weren't faring much better. 7 or 8 of the Rockefeller pirates' finest swordsmen squared off against the remaining high-ranking Navy officers, while Charles's own fighters, each one brutal in close combat, held their ground. Nearly 2,000 swordsmen and pirates in total. In both skill and numbers, they were more than a match for the Navy's elite. Over the years, the Rockefeller pirates had truly grown into a fearsome force. From his vantage point aboard the flagship, Vice Admiral Garp felt a surge of unease tighten his chest. He ground his teeth and stared at Charles, who stood coolly at the bow. Catching Garp's serious glare, Charles tilted his head back and offered a teasing grin. "Looks like the Navy's in over its head, doesn't it?" "Charles," Garp roared, blood hammering in his temples. He clenched his fists so hard his knuckles cracked. "I won't let you sail another inch. Today you die by my hand." With a thunderous crack, Garp hurled himself forward in a blur of motion, sonic boom echoing in his wake. Charles only laughed. Lightning danced along the length of his 7-star sword as he braced himself. "So many people dying to see me fall," he murmured, eyes alight with anticipation. The roar of cracking ice echoed across the sea around the Shampoo Islands. For almost 5 minutes, Vice Admiral Aokiji's He no Mi had frozen the ocean into a glittering labyrinth of crystalline walls and jagged pillars. Every ship, marine, pirate, and privateer alike, had been trapped in that icy tomb. Then the stillness shattered. At the heart of the frozen field, 2 figures faced off: Monkey D. Garp, the Navy's legendary hero of the Marines, and Charles Rockefeller, the man known throughout the world as the greatest swordsman alive. Garp's massive frame sprang forward. As he did, electricity danced across his knuckles, turning his fist into a living thunderbolt. Opposite him, Charles stood calm and unflinching. In one hand, he held a nodachi, whose blade seemed to glow like dawn's first light. A split second later came the collision. Garp's lightning-wreathed fist smashed into Charles's radiant sword with a deafening boom. Their impact sent splinters of ice raining down in all directions. Each tremor shattered layer upon layer of Aokiji's frozen rampart. Seawater burst upward in towering geysers, then quickly refroze around the fissure, as though reluctant to concede defeat. Marines and pirates caught in the blast were flung off their feet, sliding or tumbling across the slick surface. From the observation decks along the shore, every eye was fixed on the 2 titans locked in combat. "Is that really Garp versus Charles Rockefeller?" someone whispered. Across the islands, hidden in caves, behind shutters, aboard anchored vessels, thousands more watched via relay crystals. News King Morgan's voice crackled through the speakers, barely containing his excitement. "Breaking news. On the Shampoo Islands, the legendary marine hero Monkey D. Garp is clashing with the world's greatest swordsman, Charles Rockefeller. Who will claim victory in this duel of legends? Stay tuned for live updates." Just then, Morgan's comm badge buzzed insistently. He snatched it up. "Morgan here." The tiny hollow screen glowed to life, revealing a sharply dressed man framed by crimson light. His dark cloak fell in elegant folds, obscuring all but a single calculating eye. "Morgan," the newcomer said, voice smooth as oil. "It's been more than 10 years since we last crossed paths. I never imagined you'd orchestrate a spectacle of this scale." Morgan glanced outside, where Garp and Charles still thundered against each other. "Sir, you have a bird's-eye view of them now." The stranger let out a low, mirthless chuckle. "Indeed. Now I wonder, can the old sea lion withstand the blade of history's finest? Or will the next legend be written in Charles Rockefeller's name?" With that, the transmission cut off, leaving Morgan staring at the cracked ice as distant thunder rolled over the battlefield. The duel raged on, and the world held its breath. "I'd love to see what expression Rox would wear if he were still alive," Charles mused, exhaling a perfect smoke ring as he stared out at the horizon. The new world is more alive than ever. The Rockefeller pirates' recent display of power had completely upended the Navy's plans. Back at Marine headquarters, Admiral Fando was already in a panic. He stormed into the recruit training camp, shouting before he even spotted his target. "Vice Admiral Zepha, report immediately." Zepha, overseeing a squad of fresh recruits, frowned at the commotion. He approached as the messenger dropped to one knee, breathless. "Sir, Saboti Archipelago needs support. Admiral Sengoku and his forces are contained, and the Rockefeller pirates' strength far exceeds our estimates." "No time for explanations," the messenger snapped. Before Zepha could argue, Commander Crane seized his arm and pulled him toward the harbor. "We already pulled my unit back behind the line," Crane hissed. "Too late for that," the messenger replied. "Board the cutter now. We'll brief you on the way." Moments later, Zepha climbed aboard a swift launch, its prow cutting through choppy gray waters. Ahead lay the Saboti Archipelago, and beyond it, the Red Line and the holy land of Mary Joa. The Navy's gamble was set. Now all that remained was to see if they could survive the storm. Kong was in the middle of briefing the Celestial Dragons on the Chambord Islands when Crane burst into the chamber, eyes wide with alarm. "Your Graces, there's been a critical incident on the Chambord Islands," Crane panted. "The Rockefeller pirates have outmatched our forces. Admiral Garp and Fleet Admiral Sengoku have been captured by Rockefeller Charles and Douglas Barrett. The suppression fleet is now in grave danger." Sora exchanged tense glances with the other 4 Celestial Dragons. Kong had initially suspected a false alarm until he heard the name Barrett. He strode over to Sora, voice low but urgent. "Douglas Barrett?" Lord Wulauxing's face went pale. "The same Douglas Barrett who toppled 8 kingdoms in the New World 8 years ago?" Kong nodded. "His reputation alone cost us 8 devil fruits just to keep him contained. If he's involved here, the situation is far worse than we feared." Sora's expression hardened. "Send out the CP0 signal at once. We need at every available reinforcement." Without another word, the Celestial Dragons ordered Marijoi's elite guards to mobilize. Even at full speed, though, it would be at least an hour before help could reach the Chambord Islands, and every minute could mean the difference between salvation and catastrophe. An hour was all the time it took for so much to unfold. Bang! The Golden Buddha, Warring State's tremendous armament Haki form, locked eyes with his adversary, a massive ice giant who was already beginning to crack around the edges. Although Warring States maintained the upper hand in sheer strength, he hadn't made any real progress. The Ice Devil fruit user simply siphoned moisture from the frozen ground beneath his feet, reforging the giant's fractured armor as fast as it broke. No matter how violently the Buddha hammered at him, the cold shell held firm. And worse, a single misstep would mean a direct hit from the Overlord's Haki-infused punches. Before he could adjust his strategy, another colossal fist hurtled toward him. Warring States lifted his arms just in time. His golden Haki glow flared in a blinding burst. Bang! The impact sent him skidding across the ice for dozens of meters. Bang! 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 The thunderous collision of those titans sounded louder than even Tesla's crackling thunderfruit nearby. Not far off, the duel between Sakazuki and Caesar was no less ferocious. Sakazuki's left arm bore a deep, ragged gash, while Caesar's chest, once protected by bony scales, now leaked crimson through a blown-off plate. Yet Caesar's devil fruit power stitched new flesh into place almost as quickly as it was torn away, leaving them both panting for breath on the brink of collapse. "You're impressive," Caesar finally managed, an odd compliment amidst the carnage of their battle. And still, the frozen war between Golden Buddha and Ice Giant raged on, each blow reshaping the battlefield's icy expanse. Sakazuki didn't even bother replying to Caesar. They were evenly matched after all. Kuzan felt a twinge of frustration. Dealing with Esdeath alone was already a tall order, but now that Tesla had joined the fray, the situation had become even more daunting. Chapter 399, Battlefield Anxiety. Kuzan. The instant Kuzan appeared, Warring States period tensed. This young prodigy, hailed since the Warring States era, would not be stopped. With one thunderous palm strike, Kuzan sent Barrett hurtling backward. In the next heartbeat, he was soaring above Tesla, his silhouette darkening the sky. Got you! A golden shockwave erupted around them. Tesla twisted to dodge, but was still driven to his knees on the ice by the blast. Cough, cough. Blood dribbled from the corner of Tesla's mouth as he fought to breathe. His chest heaved. You bastard! At the sight of Tesla wounded, Esdeath's lips curled into a cold smile. Her hair whipped around her as her ice-blue aura flared, freezing the very air. With a roar of power, she conjured a series of razor-sharp sword energies, each blade crackling with frigid force, and sent them hurtling toward Warring States. Absolute conquest, supreme domination, I refuse to hold back. Spectral swords rained down in a relentless torrent, each arc aimed to shred through any defense. But Warring States period didn't even flinch. Unmoved, he stood ready, undaunted by Esdeath's frigid onslaught. Charles's blade rang against the ancient gold plating of Sengoku's great Buddha fist, the clash echoing like distant thunder, but leaving the golden armor unscathed. Sengoku's eyes blazed with fury. You deserve to die, he thundered. At that moment, Shuhong's strike drove into Barrett's flank, drawing a surprised grunt. Barrett staggered, but barely. A tempest of raw will unfurled around him. His conqueror's aura surged skyward, crackling lightning tracing along his limbs. Then he launched a punch, his fist wreathed in hardened armament Haki, yet overlaid with something darker, more ethereal, a ghastly ghost energy that flickered like a malevolent spirit. This was the true face of the devil's descendant. Barrett's lineage granted him command of devilish phantom power, an ominous force distinct from ordinary Haki. When he entwined it with his armament, his blows became terrifyingly potent. Charles felt a chill of recognition. He, too, harbored that same infernal essence, though his manifested aura leaned toward deception rather than brute terror, cloaking his presence in illusions and half-seen shapes that unnerved his foes. In the early days, he had hardly comprehended it, dismissing it as nothing more than a curious trick of the mind. But over years spent mastering martial arts and studying the human form in the Kingdom of Flowers, he'd peeled back layer after layer of his inheritance. Still, recently, his progress had creeped to a frustrating halt. Now, standing between Sengoku's righteous wrath and Barrett's unleashed darkness, Charles realized the truth. To survive this crucible, he would have to break through his ceiling and tap the devil's power within himself more fully than ever before. Charles felt it the moment the seven-star sword merged with his flesh, a surge of dark energy, something he could only name demonic. It crept through his veins like molten shadow, cloaking him in a Shura-like aura. As he unleashed his blade technique, a silent, spectral figure, reminiscent of the Shura King from the anime, flickered into existence behind him. This borrowed power wasn't the author's invention. It was a deliberate nod to the original series, magnifying Charles's strength and marking him as truly unique. Sengoku froze at once. His muscles locked, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. Before he could steady himself, an invisible force ripped him off his feet and sent him skidding across the ground. The imprint of a fist seal burned against the golden Buddha emblem on his back. Cough! Cough! Sengoku forced out a ragged breath, scrambling to his feet. He ran a hand over the seal's scorched edges. Sengoku, he muttered, as if speaking the name would slow his pounding heart. Watching Sengoku fly backward, Garp's eyes widened. Hey, are you all right? He shouted, concern etched in his voice. Without warning, Xiaoluo's blade descended in a deadly arc. To bit into Garp's right arm, carving a crimson gash that made him grunt in pain. Blood spattered the ground. Gritting his teeth, Garp rallied and threw a thunderous punch at Charles's face. But the blow never connected. His fist passed through empty air. Garp's heart sank. A split second later came the crackle of energy, a brilliant green flash slicing behind him. Swish! The glowing blade raked along his spine. Pfft! He staggered forward, the searing wound burning across his back. For a heartbeat, the battlefield went silent, punctuated only by Garp's ragged breath and Charles's steady, shadowed aura. The demon-touched boy stood poised, his sword humming with unholy power, ready for whatever came next. No blood flowed from Garp's back, only a shallow cut. He twisted around in surprise. What in the world? Before him stood Charles, an unnerving smile on his lips. How had the blade struck from behind? You want answers? Then beat me first, Charles said, his grin widening. A dark green aura flared around him like living flame, crackling along the twin blades at his hips. Garp lunged with a thunderous punch, but his fist passed through empty air. Hallucination? Devil fruit trickery? Garp barked. Take your best guess, Charles replied, voice cool. Garp's rage boiled over, veins throbbed at his temples. I'll send you to hell myself, he roared. He gathered his overlord's energy, black and red lightning dancing across his knuckles, and struck again. This time he felt his fist connect. Charles barely flinched. He tilted his head in mild disappointment. Impressive against ordinary foes, Charles murmured, drawing a longsword, but it's no match for a true master. He ignited his blade in a swirl of red and green sparks that crackled through the air, preparing to clash with Garp's own black and red storm of power. Charles! Garp bellowed, surging forward into the fray. You're going to break and impel down today. No excuses. Vice Admiral Garp eyed Charles with mild amusement as the young man struggled to keep up. When Garp's last punch landed, Charles had seemed to bleed off nearly half his power, a side effect of Master Zhang of Zhihai's softening technique. Garp wasn't upset. In fact, he was grateful. If Charles had relied solely on raw strength, he might have felled Garp in an instant. But Garp, a veteran of countless New World battles, simply responded with waves of Haki so forceful they shook the very air. Charles steadied himself and met Garp's onslaught with equal determination. Old man, he shot back between gritted teeth, your punches aren't what they used to be. I still remember the terror when you and Roger took on rocks. 12 years later, I can't shake that memory. Garp offered no reply. He unleashed another devastating flurry of Haki-infused blows. Each strike sent shockwaves rippling through the frozen ground, pulverizing the ice into glittering shards. Before long, their duel had lifted off the surface entirely. Garp and Charles clashed in midair, feet barely grazing the swirling fragments below, each determined to prove who was truly strongest. The ice that had bound Poseidon at last shattered, sending the great sea god adrift on the roiling waves. Around him, the battlefield still raged. At its heart, Vice Admiral Garp and Charles were locked in a titanic duel. Each thunderous blow from Garp collided with Charles's counterstrike, cracking the very air. They fought so fiercely that no one dared approach. Not far away, Admiral Warlord Sengoku was reeling under Barrett's assault. Barrett's fists, wreathed in oppressive overlord energy, struck like a hurricane, impossibly fast for a man of his towering 5-meter frame. Sengoku could do nothing but raise his arms in desperate defense as blow after blow rained down upon him. Seizing the distraction, Esdeath yanked Tesla back from the fray and launched into a blizzard of sword slashes and crackling lightning against Admiral Kuzan. Every sweep of her blade left arcs of ice in the air. Every thunderbolt tested Kuz's icy defenses. A storm of freezing wind and electric fire shrouded their clash. Meanwhile, the calmest corner of this chaos lay far to the north at Island 59 of the Shampoo Islands, where Caesar and Sakazuki, two mad scientists in their own right, had begun a cold-blooded duel of toxins and magma. Their battle, though quieter, was no less lethal, and it drew as many eyes as any of the great clashes unfolding across the sea. The duel between the two warriors had nearly torn the island apart. Yet, oddly enough, this battlefield felt almost tranquil compared to the other three raging fronts. There were no flashes of overlord magic, no whirling swords carving arcs through the sky, just raw, flesh-to-flesh brutality. A single knife blade met a single ironclad fist. Magma-heated gauntlets slammed into dragon-scale claws. Sikorsky emerged bearing 3 deep scratches down the right side of his face. Caesar's draconic tail, once sleek and powerful, now glowed with scorching heat, its tip a blurred, charred ruin from the force of those molten punches. Chapter 400. The Power of the Electromagnetic Cannon. Chaos reigned across the sea as the Navy and the Rockefeller pirates clashed in a fierce, unrelenting battle. Aboard the Poseidon, Commander Caesar Coulon watched the distant skirmishes with a cold, calculating gleam in his eye. "Navy fools," he murmured, lips curling into a sneer. "Just wait. You're about to witness the true power of our technology." Charles had placed Caesar here at the very outset of the engagement, foreseeing exactly how the confrontation would unfold. Even Shialuo had privately predicted Caesar's defeat. But there was no shame in a tactical withdrawal. After all, the Navy headquarters lay less than an hour's sailing away from the Chambord Islands. The moment the Navy picked up any distress signal, reinforcements would be on the way. The Marine Marshal, Admiral Zephyr, and a full fleet ready to crush the Rockefeller pirates once and for all. Caesar tapped the control panel at his side. He knew they had only moments before the Navy's backup fleet arrived. "They'll react any second now," he warned. "Send the signal." "As you command," his technician replied, fingers dancing over the console. In that instant, a low hum built to a deafening crescendo. Then, with a thunderous crack that split the sky, the electromagnetic cannon unleashed its deadly charge. A brilliant arc of pure energy shot forth, streaking toward the nearest enemy warship. Blinded by its brilliance, the sailors aboard the Navy vessel barely had time to register what struck them. In a flash of white-hot light, steel melted and hull plating vaporized, leaving the ship adrift and crippled against the endless ocean. Caesar allowed himself a grim smile. "Let them come," he whispered. "We can always fight another day, but today the sea belongs to the Rockefeller pirates." Charles spotted the moment at once, a faint smirk curling his lips. He stepped forward without hesitation and ensnared Garp in close quarters, cutting off every escape route until Garp was forced to face him one-on-one. Across the three main battlefields, the rest of the Rockefeller pirates saw the same signal overhead. Esdeath, Tesla, Barrett, Caesar, and the other elite fighters all launched coordinated assaults on their opponents, denying them any chance to regroup or counterattack. "What's happening?" Admiral Waring States shouted, alarm flashing in his eyes. The fireworks blooming in the night sky had served as the order, the cue for the Rockefeller pirates' top combat units to go on the offensive. Sengoku frowned in puzzlement, but his attention remained fixed on Barrett. He refused to be distracted until that threat was neutralized. Meanwhile, Garp's heart sank. He clamped a hand on Charles's shoulder. "Charles, what are you doing? The Navy's already overextended. Why help them?" Charles shook his head, voice low and steady. He didn't ease his grip. With the tip of his blade inching closer to Garp's midsection, he met the Admiral's eyes. "Isn't that exactly what I'm doing?" All around them, the Rockefeller pirates wove complex feints and counterattacks, deliberately tying up the Navy's strongest fighters. Tonight, every move had been calculated, and now Garp found himself ensnared by an old protege who knew him far too well. The Rockefeller pirates, all except those locked in the four main battlefields, were in full retreat. One by one, their ships slipped away toward the waiting dreadnought Poseidon. As the last pirate crew scrambled aboard, several Navy vessels turned to give chase, only to be sternly blocked by Rockefeller officers lining the deck rails. "Ha! Let the Navy taste defeat." Caesar Coulon laughed, stepping forward on the Poseidon's command bridge. With a crisp motion, he activated every power conduit in the ship's hull. Lightning-like currents crackled through the framework and funneled into the Poseidon's 120 electromagnetic cannons. "All batteries, bear on the Shampoo Islands fleet," Caesar ordered. At his command, the massive turrets swung into position, their barrels aligning in perfect unison. "Fire!" At his single word, the Poseidon's cannons unleashed. A wave of searing energy rippled outward, warping the air almost before it formed into projectile beams. Standing on the deck below, Admiral Sengoku's eyes widened at the destructive aura that washed over the battlefield, and beside him, Vice Admiral Garp clenched his jaw. "Not good," Garp muttered, his gaze locked on the steel behemoth looming behind Charles. The young midshipman stood to one side, heart pounding, as the Poseidon's first volley tore across open sea. In an instant, the electromagnetic slugs, each glowing with raw power, sliced through space at impossible speed. They slammed into the dozen pursuing warships in thunderous succession. Boom, boom, boom. Splintered hulls, ruptured decks, and geysers of steam marked the onset of total devastation. Charles felt the blast waves shudder beneath his boots. He swallowed hard, but even as smoke and spray roared around him, one thought burned clear in his mind. The battle was far from over. In an instant, the sea shook as tens of thousands of Marines converged on the ice floe. The heat from the explosion vaporized the entire patch of ice where the fleet had been anchored. "Charles!" Garp's eyes went blood-red with fury. He bellowed into the roar of the wind. "It's the Rockefeller pirates!" At the edge of the battlefield, the admirals, Fujitora and Ryokugyu, stared in horror at the widening breach in the marine lines. "Open fire!" one of them ordered. On the pirate flagship, Caesar Courant let out a triumphant cry and slammed his palm onto the control panel. Across the deck, 120 electromagnetic cannon barrels pivoted into position, all trained on the dozen marine warships assembling below. "Now!" Caesar shouted. "Show them hell!" Garp didn't wait for their shots to land. With a fearsome roar, he lunged at Charles and unleashed the hardest punch he had ever thrown. "Damn you!" he thundered, his fists seeming to cleave the very air. Beside him, Sengoku's body swelled to colossal size. His golden palm crashed down on Barrett with a deafening boom that split the sky. The combined shock waves from Garp and Sengoku rippled outward, racing toward Charles like an avalanche. But Charles stood his ground. He raised his sword in both hands and swung with all his might. A blade of pure, shimmering light sliced through the twin shock waves, only to see its energy scatter into the sky before it could land. The resulting explosion tore both Garp and Charles off their feet. They were flung backward, bodies arcing through the air as the blasts subsided. Even so, each man fought to right himself. Limbs braced against the turbulence, as the two adversaries hovered, locked in a moment of breathless suspension. Charles's command crackled over the comms, just as Admiral Barrett reeled from Sengoku's devastating blow. Barrett had been seconds away from intercepting Sengoku's advance, but Charles's voice cut through the chaos. "Barrett, our objective is secured. The naval reinforcements will arrive any moment. Fall back now." With Barrett pulling back, Sengoku and Vice Admiral Garp turned their attention to the stranded fleet. Seizing the moment, Charles led his team in a dash toward the eastern flank, where Esdeath and Tesla, prisoners of the Rockefeller pirates, were being guarded. In a blur of motion, Charles lunged forward, blade singing through the air. He cleaved the icy grip that bound Admiral Kuzan to Esdeath, separating the two with a single, precise strike. Before Kuzan could recover, Charles hauled the stunned Esdeath to his side. Tesla, dazed by the melee, scarcely registered the rescue until he felt Charles's firm grip on his shoulder, steering him toward the lifeboats. Above them, Caesar had just broken free from Sakazuki's relentless hold. His face white with exertion, the mad scientist swooped back in on his mechanical wings. "Elena's ready," he shouted as he landed beside Charles. Charles nodded and turned to Elena. "Now's your chance. Do it." Elena stepped onto the deck and lifted her hands. In an instant, iridescent bubbles poured forth, snaking up around the Poseidon's hull. Within moments, the 100-meter warship was encased in a flawless, translucent dome. From the horizon, Garp's silhouette grew larger as he barked orders to his gunnery crews. Cannon fire roared to life, but each shot merely bounced off Elena's bubble shield. With a final, thunderous explosion from the ship's mine rails, the pursuing fleet was engulfed in a series of concussive blasts. One after another, enemy warships lurched, listed, then plummeted below the waves. "Damnation!" Garp bellowed, eyes blazing as he spun on his heel. He raced back toward his flagship, only to stop dead in his tracks. Where the deck had been, there was nothing but a gaping maw of twisted metal and splintered wood. The Poseidon's last salvo had obliterated it entirely. Staring at the wreckage, Garp's roar faded to a low, furious growl. Above, the bubbles dissipated like morning mist. Charles, at the wheel of the Poseidon, allowed himself a grim smile. Their escape was complete, and the Rockefeller pirates had delivered another crushing blow to the Navy's pride. "Damn the Rocks pirates! Damn Rocks Charles!" Vice Admiral Garp had never felt a deeper hatred for his own incompetence. In barely a minute's time, 2 enemy bombardments had wiped out 10,000 of the Navy's finest and sent over a dozen capital ships to the seabed. Fleet Admiral Sengoku stood amid the smoke and wreckage, his expression a mask of controlled fury. "Quick, Organize rescue parties. Search every wreck for survivors. His command snapped the Marines back to order. Despite the outrage burning in his chest, Sengoku marshaled the shaken men and sent them into the fray. Garp, red-faced and seething, flung himself into the icy water to pull drowning sailors from the debris. It's worse. Admiral Kuzan has collapsed. A panicked cry cut through the chaos. Sengoku's head whipped around, and he sprinted to Kuzan's side. The admiral lay slumped against a splintered mast, a long, jagged wound across his chest oozing dark blood. "Charles," Kuzan whispered, pain lacing his voice. Sengoku's anger finally broke free. He scooped Kuzan into his arms, eyes blazing, and strode toward a waiting speedboat moored at the shattered docks of the Chambered Islands. In moments, they were speeding away, racing against time back to Navy headquarters, where Kuzan's life hung in the balance. All the major factions gathered on Shampoo Island had witnessed the events unfolding in the nearby waters. "Unbelievable. Rockefeller Charles really underestimated you," one observer murmured in awe. "You're concealed far more deeply than any of us imagined." Shachi drew in a slow, steady breath from his cigarette, then exhaled a thick plume of smoke. He let out a low, drawn-out sigh.